Hey, it's me, David Allen South, coming to you on this digital time machine. This is from the past, and you are in the present. And this message is for the present and the future. Anyway, short recap. My dad raised us atheists for a reason. He wanted us to make up our own mind. He told us about how the Greek philosophers were not afraid of information. They wanted to learn a lesson from whatever information was available. Now, we know that they gleaned information from the what do they call them in Hindi, the ancient Hindi culture? The Greeks sent several individuals over there and were fascinated with some of the different aspects of their religion, their philosophy, and some of the Greek philosophers amalgamated that information into some of their own thoughts, which makes sense because that's how information works. Anyway, I was also, because of certain events that took place, told that there were no corroborating evidences as far as the Hebrew scriptures were concerned, and that all religions were basically fake, and that we had evolved. So what I did as a young person is, after meeting Dad's parents and staying with them for a while, they lived the Hebrew scriptures in front of me. They read it in front of me, and I saw that for some reason, good news was coming from it. And I thought, well, just like the Greek philosophers, why should I be afraid of looking into it? Okay, I was told it was fables, so let me look for something valuable. The great thing was, I actually, when I started reading it, I tried to find in the history books, the encyclopedias, the dictionaries, I tried to find corroborating evidence, even though I was told there wasn't any. And I found out that there was. Literally, many of the characters in the Bible, I was able to validate as far as actually existing, which took it from fables to at least legend and above folklore, as most religions are folklore. The people that they use as their heroes don't even exist, such as mythology, for example. Anyway, to keep this short, in reading and being able to show that Abraham existed, Isaac existed, Jacob and Joseph. Joseph was the very reason that Egypt became an empire. We see that many of the things that some of these folks did, they discussed future events, and then we see down through history, those events happened as they were described many, many decades, sometimes hundreds, even thousands of years previous. And many, such as the progenitors of the Christian religion, pointed to the fact that these Hebrew scriptures were valid based on the fact that the prophecies were documented, and then the events were documented again by eyewitnesses, both friend and foe alike. Even Muhammad himself made it very clear. Abraham, David, Moses, before Abraham, Moses, David, and Jesus, the one called Jesus, were prophets because they were. They were literally people who spoke of future events. And as far as the Messiah from the Hebrew prophet of the first century, we see in Matthew 24 and Luke chapter 21, events that are happening within our very lifetime, within the last couple of 100 years to the very moments that we're existing in. You can read it, and it's like reading the headlines. So most of the more recent religions pointed to that, saying we're from that foundation, but we replaced them. When in fact, they didn't replace them. They're just trying to subvert them. And again, we were told this in the prophecies. So The whole point of this, going back even to the garden, we see grandfather and grandmother Adam and Eve in the garden, which, if you look at the 1991 peer-reviewed paper, it shows that by mitochondrial DNA in females, it traces all the way back to a single female. Absolutely confirmed by the scientists and even the authoritarians. But they were angry because it says, well, you have to show that we evolved. You're not allowed to show that we were created. And so they made them alter the information a little bit, not alter the information, but how they presented it. A and Y chromosomes, men, are all traced back to a single male. That would be grandfather Adam. And so science shows that we did not evolve. The DNA is so vast and complex. We see that it is a electromagnetic hydrodynamic computer program, biological computer program, all the way from the molecular level. It has processes, procedures, there are blueprints, schematics, and it has to follow in a precise timeline. If it didn't, then the organism could not develop properly, and different aspects of its own creation would cause its own destruction. So when we look at the universe, you look at the SOHO stereo satellites from NASA. It's 2 of them, and they were studying the sun from 2 different vantage points, and both on, I guess, the sides of each side of the Earth. And as we went around, they went around. And so they measured that the sun was losing 4 million metric tons every second, resulting in approximately 5 feet of circumference loss every day. It was 2.7 million miles in circumference in 2014 when I gleaned this information. And so that calculates to over one third of a mile, 0.3467273 something of a mile, over a third of a mile. Every year, the sun loses circumference. I calculated back 1 million years. I calculated back 10 million years. I calculated back 65 million years. Now, at 2.7 million miles in circumference in 2014, that means that if it's losing a third of a mile, that means every 3 years you go back, that's 1 mile regained. If you go back in time, it's circumference regained. So if you go back 3 million years, that's 1 million miles minimum of circumference regained, showing clearly that at 2.7 million miles in circumference, it would be 3.7 million miles. And that is 62 point something percent, or if not 64%, greater than what it was. As opposed to 2.7 million, now it's 3.7 plus million miles, and that's just 3 million years. If you look at the distance, we're 93 million miles plus or minus from the sun. So if the sun is going to be a third again to 2/3 again larger, that means that the distance between us is going to be shortened because the gravitational and magnetic forces are going to pull us closer to the sun, plus going back in time, that's natural. And then, of course, the fact that it's getting bigger, so your coefficient of the square, it's based on the square to how far you are away from your magnetic and or your gravitational source. And so the closer you are, the hotter it's going to be. The bigger it is, the more energy it's putting out. And then basically it shows you go back 3 million years and the Earth would not be able to maintain liquid water. So using science, I was able to confirm and validate the Hebrew scriptures were written and the prophecies were documented before the events took place. Many people, I didn't come up with the information, I gathered the information, were those who documented the information that came from the eyewitnesses down through the ages. And it wasn't just the Hebrew scriptures and the Hebrew people, but when they were in Egypt, there were corroborating evidences there documented. If you look at Imhotep and Dozier, There's a strong possibility that there may have been a relation between Joseph underneath Dozier. They found the grain bins, and they found the very reason that Egypt became an empire. If you go to Babylon, Daniel is mentioned down through the Medo-Persian control as well, because he was literally part of a magistrate system that went from Babylon and then Cyrus. So there was Persia, and then, of course, the Medo-Persia aspect where he brought in the family where Darius ends up being part of the story. Daniel chapter 2 discussed many of these data points. Now, I didn't know this. Remember, I was told that there wasn't a single thread of evidence to corroborate the Hebrew Scriptures, and yet we've just discussed things that are easily verifiable, and yet the people that told us there was no validity were lying or they were ignorant. Either way, they were frauds. If they were telling you something that wasn't true and they knew it, that's a fraud because they're lying to deceive. If they didn't know, but they're supposed to be an expert and they told you something that wasn't true, they're a fraud because they're supposed to be an expert and they don't know what they're talking about. And so the whole reason I'm having this intro is to let people know that religion is bad. We learned that from the garden. The Father said, don't eat that fruit. That's my personal stash. Everything is yours. It's all free. Have as much fun as you can. But they took the advice of the adversary who said, hey, that's going to make you like the angels, like the messengers, the Elohim themselves, maybe even the Father. If you do it my way, you might even be just like him. And that was a reinterpretation of the word, the entrance of religion, relying on someone else's advice, period. And that is one of the reasons that we're here. Eternal lessons in this finite timeline. He's teaching us what's right, what's wrong, the difference between good and evil. When he gives us advice, it's good for everybody. The Father never made a rule in Torah that made one person better than another. Maybe they had a higher piece of authority, but then they had more responsibility. When it came down to authority, that's one thing. But when it came down to the rules, everyone had to follow the rules the same way. One rule for the people who were underneath the Israeli banner, underneath Abraham, underneath Moses, underneath the future Messiah. And then the nations, such as in Exodus, we see that Uncle Moshe said that the Father said, anybody, all of you people in Egypt, anyone who wants to come with us, you're welcome to come. The males can be circumcised. Everyone else, if you're willing to honor Torah, you can be considered native born. And this became the congregation of Israel. And the clarion call was, everyone is invited. Everywhere they go, offer the peace of the Father and allow them to enjoy the benefits of honoring the Father's word, because he said he would bless us. But again, every generation has to have that adversarial temptation to draw us away from doing what's right. So that contrast, again, gives us more and more opportunities to see that everything that was good, everything that was bad, anything that caused suffering, sorrow, pain, misery, death, disease, it was because somebody, it was directly or indirectly because somebody had violated the Father's Torah, his rules. So the reason that I'm bringing this strong and a long introduction is to show that I was told that we evolved and that you could not trust the Hebrew Scriptures and that all religions are mythology. And I am here to say that mostly that is true. Every religion is false, but the Father gave us a letter of love. And he told us the future. He told us about things before it happened. Isaiah 46:10, he tells us explicitly that this is what sets him apart from the deities that cannot tell you about the future. Not only that, there are aspects in the Hebrew Scriptures that are scientifically accurate that no religion can offer. Atlas was supposed to carry the earth. The Hindus had, a giant turtle? And Muhammad said that it was a whale that was holding up the earth. And he also said that the sun sets in a murky pool somewhere on earth. No science there. And no prophecies of any kind from any of these other groups. The Hebrew religious folk, unless they're honoring Uncle Moshe, unless they're honoring the Torah that the Father gave him at the mountain, then they're just like the rest of us that are not honoring. And the point is, we're all in this together. We're all here to learn these eternal lessons in this finite timeline. And again, in Isaiah 45 and 46, the Father says, I am the Almighty ever-present one. I create light. I create evil. I do all these things for my purpose. What it is when he says that he's going to tell us the future to prove that he is unlike any of the others, he even discusses about how the people who chop down a tree and they carve out an idol and they bow down to worship it, and they have to carry it wherever they want to go, but they take another part of it and they use that tree and they cook their food, and then the last of it is for keeping themselves warm at night. And then when they pack up and leave their camp, they got to then grab that idol that they had carved out and carry it with them. It can't speak, it can't answer a prayer, it can't do anything, but yet the Father can do all these things, and he says that's what his desire is to have a relationship with us. The Psalms 91 relationship. Anyway, so we're about to go into some of the other parts of the series. That's basically from the fact-based faith educational symposium. I prefer symposium to debate, because one is where I'm going to try and prove you wrong, and the other is, well, we're all trying to find the truth, and so that we can all offer the information we have, check the facts, and then we can verify and or refute. So, without further ado, let's get into some of these videos that are coming up. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope that they are a blessing to you, and it gives you a chance to see that I am not making things up. I offer the evidence to show you how I come up with the conclusions that I offer. So, may you be blessed. May you be a blessing. And now let's get on with the show. Oh, hey, that's right. You know who loves you? The Father, the Messiah, and all of us. Sorry, that's Masonic. I do love you. And even though I am a flawed individual, I must say that if we can follow the Messiah's example, we will in fact show that the Father's love is true, because then he will gladly work through us and give that love and share all of those blessings through us to those in the world that are willing to open up to it. Again, be blessed and be a blessing. I'm sorry, what was the question?
I said, what do you think about what's going on with the president?
Oh, well, right now he is under attack by Islam, by the very Masons that he's a member of. Remember,
exactly.
In the scripture it states that all kingdoms will be underneath the authority of the beast structure. It says that the beast structure has berserker warriors that are violent, vicious monsters. And it says, as we know in Scripture, it says that they wear out the saints. It talks about the leadership of the end times, and it says that he will wear out the saints. It says that he will share the booty with those under his authority. And since the Muslims are under the Jesuits, since the Masons are under the Jesuits, since the Mormons and the Shriners and all these other fraternal organizations are under the Jesuit control, and the Jesuits, of course, are underneath the elite, they are destroying all of the nations. As Albert Pike said in the Morals and Dogma, actually, it was in a letter to someone, he had discussed 3 world wars that they were going to use to put the entire world underneath the beast. And during that time, of course, restructuring the world so that people will be under the control of the adversary and won't really be able to do anything but comply or suffer the consequences thereof. And the mark of the beast is not exactly what people think it is, but again, because of the dissemination of information. Again, down through the ages, the adversary controlled the information so that people can only come to certain conclusions. And those conclusions...
the God of this world, right?
That is correct. The adversary is the very same one that spoke through the serpent and conned Adam and Eve into violating the Father's word, and is in charge of the minions that are there to tempt us and cause us, again, to continuously violate the Father's rules. I'm drinking coffee out of a cup, but I don't want anyone to see.
You know, I got my coffee made. I started unloading the dishwasher, then I was scrubbing the counter, and I had just got the glasses. I never got my coffee made.
Oh, well, you're certainly, can you do that while you're talking with us?
You know what? I think I did put it on. It might be ready. Wait a minute. I think I did put it on.
You can take your phone with you. And, okay.
I think I did make the coffee, come to think of it.
I did too. And so what I'll do while you're getting your coffee is I'm just going to try and get the audience caught up on what we were talking about before, so that then
but I like what you're saying. I want to know more about Trump, because I'm very involved with it. I mean,
I understand.
For him.
Okay, yeah. I'll deal a little bit with that. Let's see. How can we find it? How can I speak intelligently and look for what we're looking for? Let's see. We're looking for the leader that shares. He will share.
You know, my grandfather, my daddy Bert, who was not really my grandfather, but my grandmother's second husband, was a wonderful, wonderful man, and he was 32nd degree Shriner.
Yes. What was his degree again?
32nd, the highest you can go.
Is he still alive?
No.
Doggone it. All right. Let's see. Where can I find that? Looking through here.
Yeah, I was with him when he died. I went to North Carolina. I was at his deathbed. And he was just always so wonderful.
Again, the people can, like my family, members of Masons for hundreds of years, try to be honest, try to be honorable. They try to rescue the needy. When my cousin Jimmy, who was my age, died in a house fire, a lot of the cousins became volunteer firemen because they wanted to make certain that they could see to it that people didn't die in their homes, special, precious little innocent people. I myself, I did not become a fireman. What I did was I tried to develop homes and systems to where people wouldn't be able to burn to death in their homes. And since then, I went to my cousin, who is a fire chief now, finally has a paid job. And I told him about my idea, and he says, well, I'm going to put a bunch of firemen out of work. I said, no, I'm just going to give them periphery duties, and they'll never have to run into a burning building again. Basically, when I was younger, I worked in the chemical industry, and as a chemical inspector, it was my duty to be in charge of quality control whenever there was a transfer of chemicals from one tank to another tank, whether it's a tank from a ship, from a barge, from a rail car, whatever. And I would take samples. I would document when it started, when it ended, the different various aspects of the traverse. And one of the jobs that I was on, I was in the control room of the ship with the management was French, and the people who did the labor were not French. And while they were doing their job, right next to the job that I was working on, there was a guy who had to look through the manway and watch the guys that were down in the tank, because they had full suits on, and they had high pressure hoses with hot solvent chemicals that would explode if they got exposed to air. So these people they're under complete suits, just like, not like being out in space, but like being.
That's what my thought was, yeah.
But like being way down at the bottom of the ocean. Remember how they used to come out of the diving bell and they had those super heavy suits on?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Well, these had to be lined with rubber, and they had to send oxygen down to them so that they could breathe and to keep their bodies cool, because they're dealing with hot chemicals, and they're hosing down the walls and then pumping the chemicals out. And while they're doing that, the guy has to make certain if there's a problem to shut the pumps down, send a rope down, rescue the people if they have problems. Well, Well, the thing was, they had to put a blanket of uh, gaseous nitrogen above the vapors of the hot chemicals that they were using to rinse off and clean the walls because it would keep oxygen from getting to the chemicals and blowing up the entire ship. So he stuck his head down too far too many times and he got overcome by the nitrogen and he passed out. He almost fell 90 feet and killed himself. But another worker found him hanging over halfway in and his legs were folded, went limp. So they balanced his weight out to where he didn't fall into the tank, but he was out cold and he was suffering from oxygen because his body was trying to, by the basic involuntary structure, he kept trying to breathe, but he was breathing in more and more nitrogen and he was starving from oxygen. So here we are, and they're laughing about my 3-month French course that I took in high school and the fact that I didn't practice it, I couldn't speak French very well. And so they're laughing at my terrible accent and my terrible diction and my inappropriate vocabulary. And all of a sudden, the phone rings on the ship in the control room, and he gets somber. Literally, you could tell his attitude changed right away. Since I didn't know French, I didn't know what he was saying. I just knew something was wrong. So 5 of us followed him, and we came out of the control room, took a left through the internal hallway. We passed first aid to get to the door to walk outside the ship. Then we had to walk to the front of that part of the ship. Then we got to the gangway that was 300 yards to the front of the ship where this particular tank was. So we're running. We were running all the way to get him. We grab him, we turn around, and we run with him all the way back on the gangway and then all the way back to first aid. So instead of my knowing what was going on and saying, let's grab an oxygen tank in first aid and get it to him so we can get air to him sooner, I didn't know what the problem was. So we had to go all the way, get him and get all the way back, which starved him another 4 or 5 minutes of oxygen. And it took 45 minutes for the color to return to his lips and to his body and stuff. He literally almost died. And
right?
Yeah. And
is that when you were praying? Yeah.
Well, it wasn't so much.
Were you an atheist then?
Oh, no. I was a believer. And of course, we were hoping and praying for his health. But for the most part, he wasn't dead. He was just unconscious, starving, and we had to get oxygen to him. But he could have easily died, and he was getting brain damage every minute that he didn't have air because he was continuously breathing the nitrogen and not enough oxygen was coming in, and plus the chemicals that he was still ingesting that were... Anyway, so that's when I found out that nitrogen eliminates oxygen's ability to, let's say, start a fire. So when in 1991, when they said that Saddam Hussein had lit off 217 derricks in Kuwait, I prayed to the Father. At that time, I was working in a chemical plant. I was no longer a chemical inspector. And I was working in a chemical plant. I was working alongside engineers. Well, I worked under the engineers. I was working alongside the maintenance crew. And they were making $25 an hour. I was not getting $25 an hour. I was getting more like, I don't know, 8, 9 if I was lucky. But nonetheless, while I was there, I happened to go to see a friend of mine who worked in a restaurant. I had some time off. It was in downtown Houston, so it was a drive to get there. And when I got there, I'm just having a beer. Back then, I drank beer, and not way too much, but still, nonetheless, just something to do while I'm there watching the television. That's when the news came on saying that the derricks had been torched off. Instantly, I started to pray. Within 24 hours of that time, and I don't even know if it was within 10 minutes, but I know that by the next day, it was odd. I think it was very around. I think it was right when I started to pray that I saw this image in my mind, and the message that came to my mind was very polite, very cordial, and just as I was looking at the image, it was basically not a tank, but like a crane with a boom, and then on the end of it was a collar, And the father said, you take this collar, you put it over the flames and around the nozzle of the derrick, you flood it with nitrogen, and it will put the flame out right away. Then you can cap the derrick and save, the waste of all of that oil being spewed up into the atmosphere, then coming down onto the ground and then just polluting the ecosphere.
Oh.
So I went in the next day. The next day that I had a shift. I'm sorry?
No, I wanted to know, did you do an invention?
Well, yeah, that's what I did. The very next day, I went into John. I don't remember his name right now. Oh, his name was Boucher. I think his name was John Boucher. He was one of the engineers, and I went into his office because I had a couple of minutes, and I said, hey, told him, reminded him about the derricks, and I says, I prayed a little bit. I said, I think that I have a solution, and I told him, I said, you got a boom on the end of a crane. You put it over the flame. You flood it with nitrogen. It'll put the thing out, put the fire out. Then you can cap it off. He said, it's a stupid idea. Go back to work. Well, if I would have called my dad knew Red Adair. He knew Red Adair because he did work for Krupp Atlas. Not Crap Atlas, but Krupp Atlas. And Dad knew Red Adair. He would have called Red, and Red would have instantly made one and sent it over there, and he would have gotten the money and the credit. But they sent his competition, Boots and Coots, over there. It took them almost 2 years, if I'm not incorrect in my memory, to come up with it, and they even called it a nitrogen collar. Now, I don't know if Boucher saved my drawing or threw it in the trash, but the minute that came out on the news, I was fully aware of the fact that I gave him that I actually had it already drawn up. Whenever the father gave me the idea, I drew it up and I had it ready with the explanation on it. Just like in 1975-76, I was up in Minnesota, the first time I ever worked for McDonald's. And I started sweeping floors. Then I got to help rotate the freezer. They let me be the fry guy. After that, they let me run the griddle. As long as I could show that I was adequate or more than adequate, then they would let me move up. Then they let me run the till up in the front line, and until you can get 0 pluses and 0 minuses, they're never going to let you go to the drive-through, because the drive-through is the most hectic because you're pretty much by yourself, and it's a constant barrage during times of being busy.
What's 0 pluses and 0 minuses?
Well, whenever you came up and said, I want a burger and I want some fries and apple pie and give me a soda, then I would confirm the types of each. If there was anything specifics, like what type of soda. If you just said a drink, I would say, would you want like the ice cream drinks, or do you want a soda drink? And then whenever you confirmed it, then I would read it back to you or quote it back. And then I would confirm it. And then I would go and try to gather all of the stuff up. 0 pluses and minuses on a till is when you give me the money and I give you your change. I give you the exact amount of change. I don't give you too much because that would make me a minus. My till would be minus whatever I gave you over, and a plus would be if I didn't give you enough change, then my till would be in the plus margin, and that meant that I didn't give enough change out. And 0 plus or minus means you give the exact change out necessary so that you're both protecting the customer and the employee. I mean, the customer and the company. Because if it's a minus, that means the company loses. If it's a plus, the company wins.
Yeah, you have to check out. Yeah.
There you have it. Okay. And so I had a couple of seconds, because what would happen was, because of my Tourette and autism, if somebody stops, as you know, when I'm having a conversation, I jump right in. When I went up, the first order came in. Hey, welcome to McDonald's. Thank you. Can I take your order? And, give me a Big Mac, give me a fry, give me a Coca-Cola. And he stopped. So I went and started to gather his order. I didn't realize we didn't have video cameras, and they were way behind the building, and all you heard was that damn bell ring, excuse the expression. And so while I'm gathering his order, then he starts, because he turned to ask the person in the passenger seat. I didn't know this. And so while he's asking the person in the passenger seat, I walked away from the speaker and I'm gathering his meal. While I'm getting the fries, his drink is already pouring into the cup. Then he says then he started to tell me the next order. I had to stop filling up the fry. I had to stop the drink from filling the cup so it didn't overfill. I had to confirm his first order, ask him to repeat the second order. Then I had to confirm both orders and try and get caught up again. Well, what he did during that time is he turned to the kids in the back and asked them what they wanted. So I'm just finishing up I'm finishing his order at the same time trying to gather and getting caught up as much on the second order, and he starts to give me the third order. Well, I'm not quite overwhelmed.
Very inconsiderate, don't they?
No, not inconsiderate. I didn't know the system.
Well,
they didn't.
Yeah, but they could give you the whole order at once too. You know.
Well, nonetheless, they didn't know that they had a rookie online, but that's okay. As soon as I got done with that order, I had the ability to morph my system to being aware of waiting until they gave me the entire order. But the minute that I had a moment free, I ran over because the manager was silly enough to walk by me but not check on me. And I ran up and I says, "Hey, look, if you could get me a radio, I can literally be talking to these people as I'm putting their order together and I won't have to stop, go back and confirm." He looked at me dead in the eye and he said, "That is a stupid idea. You need to go back to work." Well, in 2002, I went to Amman, Jordan. In Amman, Jordan, across the street from the hotel that I was staying, there was a Burger King, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and what looked like a Sam's Club behind them, a big, massive building with all kinds of wares that people could buy. And they had radios. So you see, in 1976 till 2002, all around on the other side of the world, even where I drove through, the taxi driver drove for like 4 hours to get me to my hotel on the way to Amman, Jordan. And there was nothing but poor folk the whole way. Then all of a sudden, on the way, and we're getting closer to Amman, Jordan, and it's getting more like a cross between Vegas and New York, because that's where the rich people hung out. And it was opulent and amazing. Sure, there were some lesser valued homes and neighborhoods, but it was a stark contrast to seeing shanties and metal covered roofs over tents and little mini sheds and little goat fences and things like that. And them having radios was a confirmation that when the Father gave me the idea, it was an idea that has sustained and made it multiple millions of dollars for Motorola or whoever got the contract for communications. And those are just two of the ideas that the Father gave me. But the reason I brought them up is because both times when I shared it with them, they told me that it was a stupid idea, and I needed to get back. I needed to get back to my minimum wage job where I would never be able to go anywhere.
And think of it, you invented those things.
Well, wow. No. These were gifts from the Father. They were inventions given to me by the Father above. So yes, but no.
You passed it on, yeah.
Yeah, now there are things that I literally did go out of my way to try to invent, such as, like I said, the system that I developed that I went to my cousins and any other fire chief or fireman. I did develop that myself, but it was based on the idea that the Father gave me. Like I said, he showed me the entire picture, and it was like a video. Yeah. Watching the boom crane move up and put the collar over it and all of that. So, I mean, that was a gift. But later on, when I learned about its ability to eliminate fire, I tried to come up with that on my own, because there's sprinkler systems in myriads of buildings, industrial, residential, and commercial. So all we have to do is put low pressure nitrogen just in a gas form, have sensors all along the building. And instead of having expensive fire extinguishers that are heavy, difficult to move around, and also a limited capacity, the thing about nitrogen is you can have a massive tank outside. You can quadrant off the building to where you can seal off any region where there's the danger, raise up the nitrogen level to a specific amount, have the speakers say there has been an incendiary issue in such and such part of the building. Please gently and calmly walk to your nearest oxygen tank, which could be a very small tank that could easily last 20, 30 minutes, 2, 3, 4, 5 times longer than anyone would need to be able to get out of the building. And then, because of the nitrogen level, and since many firemen are already equipped with having a face mask with oxygen, because it's to protect them from the 400, 500, 800 degree smoke that would burn their lungs and suffocate them, and then they would be on the ground needing rescue. Instead, they would walk into a building where there wasn't smoke, there wasn't fire, there's just a heavy blanket of nitrogen. And it was John, the guy from the hydroponics, the aquaponics, that I was telling him about. You see, when I went to see John, because I told him I wanted to help him.
Oh, you did go to see him?
Well, yeah, but I offended him. I thought that since I was going there to see if I could volunteer to help him, I thought, well, I better tell him a little bit about my background, about why and how I'm a believer, and a little bit of the ideas that the Father gave me over the years. So I was giving him a verbal resume, because you don't.
I don't know if he could appreciate that.
Oh, he didn't. He was.
No, he couldn't.
No, he was angry. He literally, and that's one of the reasons I don't come around anymore. He said because I tried to explain to him, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. I thought since I was going to help you, I was assuming that I needed to give you kind of my resume, my background, because you don't want some crackpot. Even if I was the greatest engineer in the world and the greatest person and the hardest worker, if I was let's say I was some crackpot religious guy into the occult or something, just pretending to be a believer to infiltrate. And so I felt it was necessary to share, so that, because nobody wants to be around a crackpot. Well,
John's not a nice person.
Well, he was very offended, and so he made some offensive comments to me, and so that's the reason I don't come around anymore. But I wanted to talk to him and go around it and start over again. Because you see, when he started trying to talk me into believing in certain Christian doctrines, I says, oh, please don't waste your time. I said, that's not what I'm here for. Because the first thing that he said is, I know why that you're here. You're here so that I can mentor you. And I says, well, yes, that's a great possibility. Everywhere I go, I'm interested in learning. I said, also, everywhere I go, I try to share what I find. I says, this is a great fit. And but then again, when he tried to convince me of the Trinity, and he also tried to convince me of quantum physics, and I just told him, yeah, I told him flat out. I says, well, I don't fall for quantum physics. I said that was developed by the Masons and the evolutionists to try and trick people into a realm that we cannot do any form of verification. And so he thought, well, maybe giving me a little bit more data would convince me. And so I tried to give him data on my side and to let him know, please. And I said, how about if we stick to some of the things that we agree on? So he says, well, here, let me show you around. And everything that he talked to me about, since I myself worked with hydroponics many years previously, I was thoroughly aware of everything that he was doing. And the minute that I saw the fish, and he explained that he was recycling the fish water, and it was easy. Everything, all of my experiences made it very easy for me to understand anything and everything that he has. And everything from the plumbing, moving the water, to all of the processes beyond. And I was even going to suggest, well, man, you've got all of this biomatter. You could actually have a tertiary filter to where you can separate so that there's only a certain amount of the biomatter that you need to feed the plants. And then the bulk of the biomatter can go to larger tanks to where then we can use those, because they use algae in industry now to create alcohol, so that they could use that alcohol as another form of fuel, because they mix it with gasoline and stuff like that. Oh. So I literally, it was like the Father kind of, okay, well, hey, here's another thing. But I, The fact that I didn't believe in quantum physics, the fact that I didn't want him to tell me about Christian doctrines, I had offended him to the point to where he had made some kind of incendiary comments towards me that offended me. And then when I tried to explain myself, because my problem is, and again, he was being very sincere and he was just trying to help. And again, it was my fault for trying to give him my resume. I should have just let him talk. And so just this week, yesterday or the day before, I was thinking, well, I'm going to call him back. And even though I completely understand his entire system, I should give him a chance to tell me everything about it, because he told me 5 times that he was never going to listen to anything that I said. When I was trying to explain myself after he said this, that, and the other about something that I had said, well, I tried to explain myself because I thought, well, maybe he just doesn't understand and he doesn't know my references. And so, because that's basically the biggest problem is it's usually just a misunderstanding because they don't have the information that I have. So, but he said, I'm not listening to you. But I didn't quite understand what he meant. I thought, he said, I'm not hearing you or I'm not listening to you. Well, because I was in the middle of speaking, trying to explain myself, I didn't quite know. And I says, I'm sorry. And after the 3rd time he says, I'm not listening to you, I said, oh, wait a minute. Oh, you're not, it's not that you're not hearing me, you're not listening to me. He says, yeah, I'm not going to listen to anything that you say. And I said, oh, wow, I'm sorry, I didn't understand. And so I tried, well, because again, he tried to share something with me. And of course, I was impervious. Because again, when you want to get smaller than the atoms and the molecules, they say that time is suspended and all physics and all the rules of physics do not exist. So I tried to explain to him about the harmony of the universe and the balance between the particles. Because that is something that has been verified. I'm sorry?
That's too deep for him.
Oh no, it's just something that he did not have access to. Literally.
Yeah, but he's not going to listen to him.
Well, I think that I had offended him unwittingly to the point to where he wasn't willing to listen to anything that I'd said. To where
No, I think you're putting too much on yourself because he is the type of person that's his way or no way. You know, he's full of pride.
Well, that's okay. Again, every single person is where they are, and where I'm lacking, I need people to help me if they have the pathway back to the closer avenue to the right way. The thing about
that's beautiful. I love that. That's beautiful.
Well, again, the way that they have it in Back to the Future, you have your timeline, and I'm drawing this for the people on TV. Here's your timeline here, and they say, "Oops, okay. Here's your timeline here. Now, you go back in time and you make any changes, well, you got a tangent. And when you get that tangent, you start a whole new timeline people are going to follow." Now, of course, to me, time travel is ridiculous because, again, you literally have to take the Earth. You have to take the solar system, and you have to take every planet and every star and each solar system, each galaxy, and you have to make them go backwards.
I can't get into all that.
Well, yeah, it's just not possible. Time is linear because when the Father created the universe, it was starting here and ending here so we could go back to eternity. We would have eternal lessons so that when we go out and fill the universe, we will know what's right, what's wrong. We will know the difference between good and evil. But again, it's the Masons and the Luciferians that want people to suspend facts, to suspend reality so that then they can convince people of anything and everything. They want to convince people of evolution because it's blasphemous and it takes people away from the word. So the missionaries of the Masonry, in other words, the proponents of evolution, they want you to believe in evolution. And it's okay if aliens did it. It's okay if it happened by accident. It's okay if you believe in anything, as long as it's not the creator of the universe based on the Hebrew scriptures. They say that you can present any theory as long as it's against and opposes the Hebrew scriptures. And so they invented quantum physics so that they could say, well, time and physics are suspended there, and then they have the ability to make up anything that they want, and you can't disprove it because you can't go there and put it to the test. It's just like the theory of evolution. One of the greatest minds in history, I think it was Sir Arthur Keith, I believe. He may have been an Oxford graduate, a professor, and he taught and he believed in evolution. And I believe his statement was, evolution is unproved and unprovable. But then he says, but we believe it because the alternative is unthinkable. Masons and Jesuits and Templars under Lucifer will not allow themselves to agree with anything in the scriptures. They will only use the scriptures to trick other people. That's why they take excerpts out of context from the scriptures to manipulate people. When you look at the scripture that they use in Amos about how does a man rob the Almighty? Well, by not bringing in your tithes and your offerings. Because when you do not bring in your tithes and your offerings, if you're not meeting the needs of the temple and of the sacrificial teams, if you're not meeting the needs of the poor and the infirm and the orphans and the widows, then you are robbing the Almighty. And this is where the Messiah said, what you have done for me, what you have done for the less fortunate is the same that you have done for me. Because he said, because you didn't take care of the widows, you didn't take care of the orphans, you didn't take care of the infirm, because you neglected them, you neglected me.
The least of these, yeah.
Exactly. Because we didn't do what the Father said and meet the needs. The good news is, the Father has made salvation available for everybody. So our duty is to take the Father's promises that were handed down in the mountain, as always, and then find a need and meet it. Because it is that love, it is that humility, it is that sincerity that gives the Father the ability to use us as a vessel, that he can pour out his energy through us and make things happen. And those blessings, that's how he said that we would be a blessing to the nations by allowing the Father to do what he promised he would do through us. And that's why when the original proto-Catholics, the proto-Templars, the proto-Jesuits had joined with the Orthodox leadership of Israel, who conned Rome into murdering the Messiah. Because he didn't conquer Rome, they had Rome murder him. And so, but that was it had to be that way. They would have not murdered him knowing that he was the Messiah. And we would not have had the sacrifice. We would not have had a Passover lamb. Then we would not have been able to go into first fruits. We would not have been able to then start the revival. And revival is necessary. We were reading, when they brought up Ezra chapter 9, that Sabbath meeting, the only Sabbath meeting.
And the big thing was you wouldn't take on our sin.
Yes, of course. Again, that was the whole thing about it. The sacrifice is to cover for our violations. But the Messiah, once and for all, the Messiah died for all life forms. And so salvation is available for everybody.
It is finished, right?
Yes.
People don't realize it.
Exactly. The spring feasts were completely fulfilled in all of the actions that the Messiah did. Hey, thank you. I'm going to bring that up because where do we find it?
I'm just telling you what the Holy Spirit's telling me.
All right. The Father is a spirit. The Father is righteous. The Father is the Holy Spirit. Remember John 4:24. The Father is a spirit, and we are supposed to worship him in spirit and in truth.
Yeah.
In retrospect, remember we went to John chapter 9, the healing of the blind man, all the way to chapter 15. And when the Father said, if you love me, you keep my commandments. If you keep my commandments, it says that the Father and I will come and make our abode with you. In other words, just like he promised in the Revelations, in the letters to the congregations, it says that if we knock and you open the door, we will come in and we will sup. In other words, have dinner with you or share the spiritual food with you that you need that will give you the spiritual nutrition and the ability to accomplish what it is that you need. Well, the thing is the early followers of the Messiah, after they murdered the Messiah, then in Acts, we have what they call the Day of Pentecost, where the Father poured out his energy and then indwelt with these precious followers. Remember, the Messiah said it in John 14, hey, don't be sad. If I go to the Father, that is awesome. The Father will come to you himself. He says, and if I go, I will go to prepare a place for you. I will come again. Let your heart not be troubled. Because if I go, I am going to prepare a place for you, so that where I go, you can be with me. And then he discusses how he and the Father will join in relationship with us, and how they will come and live inside of us and speak and communicate with us. Because that's what we read. Is that not accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, go ahead.
Not up, but I have a friend that's up, so we probably need to get off.
Okay. All right. But the one thing.
Sorry.
That's okay. Just 30 seconds, please. In that dissertation, there was not a disembodied individual mentioned. There wasn't a third party Holy Spirit. It was only the Messiah and the Father. And in Revelation, we see, and then I'll cut it off. In Revelation, because I did not have the ability on our last conversation. So when we see that it says that there was a silence in heaven about a half an hour because the scroll could not be opened to where it could not be read. And it says, I looked about and there was sadness. And it says, and then all of a sudden they said that there it is, the Lamb that appeared to be slain from the foundation. It says, and he was worthy to take the scroll. And it said, the angel took the scroll from the Father. He took the scroll from the Father and gave it to the Lamb who had been slain, and that was the Messiah. And it says that he handed him the scroll, and he was able to break the seal, and then that's what started the melee of the tribulation. And this, again, the whole point is, it shows the Father on his throne, the Messiah on his throne, no Holy Spirit. And so showing clearly that...
So you don't believe in the Trinity.
Right. Oh, of course not. The Trinity, there are no less than 13 Trinities. And every single one of them is from a pagan organization. There are the two separate Trinities from the Hindi group, where you have your Krishna, your Brahma, and you've got your Krishna, Brahma, and you got your two sets, you got your Set, you got your P. The two different forms of the Egyptian. The Babylonians had a trinity. The Syrians had a form of trinity. And the Father said, do not worship me the way pagan gods are worshipped. And all pagan gods had a form of the Trinity. That's why I am not a Trinitarian. I was never a person who believed in the Trinity. But again, it is inculcated into the New Testament. So I do not put any fault on anybody that believes in it, because I got conned into it when I went into the Bible college. But anyway, again, the Father as
I do believe. Yeah, I need to go.
No, that's okay. This segment, we will put an end to it. Thank you so much for your time and effort. And you have a good day. Thank you.
You too. God bless you.
Thanks. Bye. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and continue on that, just to be able to finish. I want to go to Daniel. And in Daniel, because the whole thing is, Candy and I wanted to discuss revival. Daniel talks about why we got kicked out of the land, why the city and the temple were destroyed. Jeremiah, was told that we'd be kicked out of the land for 70 years, but then the Father would bring us back. In Isaiah, we were told that we would get kicked out of the land, but that we would be brought back. I can verify that he said that we would be brought back. I'm making the assumption that he said that we would be kicked out. The assumption, of course, based on if we were out, then to be brought back, obviously we got kicked out, because we wouldn't leave on purpose. It was our land. We were sent there for a reason. But then we were supposed to send emissaries out to fill the earth. Okay, but so we will go. The revival that they talked about in that Sabbath visitation, that was in, let's see. Oh, that's right. Ezra. Where is Ezra? There it is. It was chapter 9. It says, now when these things were done, what had happened was they had gone back to rebuild the city walls. They had gone back because they wanted to rebuild the temple. Because again, this was prophesied in Isaiah. Isaiah stated clearly that Cyrus, I believe this is in the beginning of chapter 45 or 46, I believe it's 45, talks about how he called Cyrus by name in two separate sentences and says that Cyrus will do all of the Father's will in helping to build the foundation to the city and the temple, to rebuild the city and the temple. Well, again, to rebuild it means that it was destroyed. And we see that that happened, I think, in 587 before the Common Era. 609 BC, Shalmaneser had already been laying siege on the city and beating the crap out of the inhabitants in the region. But by 587, Nebuchadnezzar had come in. They had already won the battle, destroyed the city, and carried the captives away, which, of course, Daniel and Ezekiel were two of the people. And, of course, they had been renamed, the three Hebrew children renamed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Well, one was Mishael, I'm sorry. The other was Azaryahu. And Abednego, I don't remember what his name was. Oh, Amaziah. So Amaziah, Shechaniah, and anyway, Azanyahu, Shechanyahu. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I should look them up. Anyway, we got kicked out of the land. Ezra was sent back to survey the land and help. Nehemiah, Christians call him, was also sent back. He was the cupbearer for the king, I believe, King Darius or Ahasuerus. And he went back, surveyed the walls in the city, and then literally himself and with a team started to rebuild the walls. And when the walls started to be rebuilt, people from Jordan started sending letters back to Medo-Persia, the rulers there, and saying, hey, these are rebellious people. You've got to stop them from doing that. Because if they do that and if they rebuild their city, they're going to rebel. Rebel. But it wasn't their plan because they were rebuilding the city because the return had been promised, and they were just following the Father's promises on the timeline, going through the process of the promises in the procedural timeline. So when the Transjordanians got the letter to Ahasuerus, Ahasuerus sent a letter back and said, cease and desist all building until this is figured out. So then I think it was the high priest or the local magistrates of the Hebrews sent a letter and said, please check your archives. We were just recently given an edict by Darius. Before that, we were given an edict by Cyrus himself. Please check the annals, the records, and the documents, and you will see that we are not a rebellious people. We have been humbled, and now we are being restored. And sure enough, it says that they looked into the archives and found these documents, which meant that not only did they have extensive archives, but they also had a good Dewey Decimal System. So you could find, because it's in scrolls, and written down and put in little cubbies. So when it was confirmed, that was the final written document that allowed the city, the temple, to be rebuilt, and then Israel was allowed to return. So then Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, Yahusha, the high priest, and a bunch of the people that started to come with the entourage were given permission by the Ahasuerus or Darius or whoever it was, and they told the Transjordanians, hey, not only are you to cease and desist from stopping them from building, but you are to give monies and laborers to help them do the job. So that edict, from that point on, is where the formula in Daniel chapter 9 started the time clock. Bang! 490 years from that point in time, the city and temple were to be destroyed again by the prince to come. And that happened in 70 AD. Titus, the son of Vespasian, who was the emperor of Rome, destroyed the city and the temple as predicted. If you go back 49 years, 1/10 of that 490 years, you go back, that's a Jubilee span of time. That was when the Messiah was executed and resurrected. So you see, you go back from the execution and resurrection, right there, the beginning of that, of course, is when the Messiah came to earth 463 years after this edict. Now we're going to look at what the Messiah accomplished in Daniel chapter 9 spiritually. Well, because in Ezra it's discussing how they had a revival. What he is discussing is the fact that when we got kicked out of the land, when they were about to bring them back, when these guys from under Medo-Persia, from being under Cyrus of Persia, being then conquering Babylon overnight, from Baalshazar, who was the great-grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, who was the one who showed and was shown how Daniel was a faithful servant. Daniel, in chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, the father gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream. In the dream, he was shown all of the empires down through the ages until Messiah returns. And of course, he said Babylon is the first king. But then it says that after Babylon, it will be conquered by the Medos and the Persians. After the Medos Persians, then of course they're going to have a swap by the Grecians who would conquer them. And after that, they would have a succession, and that would be Rome. And we see that Rome is in charge because the Messiah hasn't returned, hasn't filled the earth with his word, but yet Rome is still in charge. If you don't believe me, check out who the Masons serve. The Masons and the Muslims all serve under the Jesuits. The Jesuits and the Templars all serve under the Pope. The Pope serves under the elite Dark Lords, the Dark Baal, the Dark Kabbalah, or Cabal. All right. When Ezra and Nehemiah went back, rebuilt the city and the temple, they had a celebration. So they got a bunch of people together. Daniel came back from Babylon to be there for a short period, but then had to cruise back to Babylon. But it says that Ezra read Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. They celebrated for the first time in who knows how long, celebrated tabernacles. They celebrated the feasts, and the Father blessed them. They had revival. Again, why did they get kicked out of the land? We see that here in Daniel. So we will go to Daniel. Now that I didn't actually read Ezra, I just gave it a synopsis because Daniel basically in his letter expresses the same thing. Daniel chapter 9 says, in the first year of Darius, son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the numbers of the years, whereof the word of Yahuwah came to Jeremiah. The word of the Almighty was given to the one called Jeremiah. Nowadays, his name is Jeremiah, the prophet, that would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. And I set my face unto Elohim Yahuwah, the Almighty, ever-present Yahuwah, to seek by prayer, in supplications with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. And I prayed unto Yah, my mighty one, and made my confession, and said, O Yah, the great and dreadful Almighty, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him, and to them that keep his commandments. We have sinned, we have committed iniquity, we have done wickedly, we have rebelled even by departing from thy precepts and thy judgments. We got kicked out of the land. We got expelled because we didn't honor the commandments. Uncle Moses said that if we didn't do everything we could to obey Torah, if we tried to get around Torah, around one way or the other, that we would get in trouble, that we would lose that relationship with the Father. Neither have we hearkened unto thy servants the prophets. Remember, they warned us over and over again, return to the Father, return to Torah. But you see, the oral law people, the mystics, the people who were still pagan-minded, invented what was called the oral law. They even call it the oral Torah, which is horrifically blasphemous. But it basically stated that there is a higher level of learning than Torah. And only these mystics have that ability to have a greater understanding. But no, that's not true. You want a greater understanding, understand this, that relationship with the Father of Psalms 91, where we hide in his presence, where we're way in here in his presence and nothing can harm us, that the Father hasn't specifically deemed to teach us certain lessons or to cause us to endure, to prove that we trust him and that we can trust his word and that he will bring us through. I cite Job. He was a righteous man. He even made sacrifices for his own family and prayed for their sins. And yet they were all wiped out. The adversary thought that would be all it takes for him to curse the Father. Well, that didn't do it. So we see, it says that here comes the adversary, the one Satan or Lucifer. Ha, 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 ha. And he cordially waits in line until it's his turn to stand before the Father, because the spirit realm has the hosts, and the hosts are in charge of overseeing the universe. And they come check in. And again, I believe the highest host is Lucifer, and his duty was to lead us into sin. Leading us into sin gave the Father the ability to cover us all under the same umbrella. Under that same umbrella, since we are sinners, that umbrella covers our sin. What happened in the garden? They were tricked into violating. They took advice from the adversary. They didn't take and follow the advice of the Father above. Bam! The Father was telling us the truth. He said, if you eat of that fruit in that very day, entropy will enter in and death will be a result. They didn't have any concept of death. They had never seen it happen. They had no concept of sickness. They had never experienced it. So, when the adversary comes sashaying in and saying, hey, baby, look at that fruit. That's gorgeous, man. It smells so good, doesn't it? The breeze is just coming. It just smells so amazing. You know something? It'll make you wise. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, she said, oh, well, we're not supposed to eat that because certainly we will die. The Father said so. And he says, he's holding out on you. If you eat that fruit, you'll be just like the angels. You might even be just like the Almighty himself if you eat that fruit. And it says that she started to mull that particular advice over. And it started to examine her cogitations and say, when she perceived that it was a possibility that something could be gained from eating that fruit, not just nutritionally, but that it might have the capability of making her wise and maybe even powerful, like the Almighty or the angels, all of a sudden, that consumed her mentality. She then accepted that as an alternate reality and set it above the reality that the Father had put forth. She followed that advice, pulled that fruit off, contemplated it, and it says that Adam was standing right there next to her. She took a bite out of that fruit, and immediately there was a change in her physiology, a change in her spirituality, to where even Adam himself could tell something was different. But yet now she's terrified, and she's all alone. And it says, and she gave to him that was with her. She gave him the fruit and begged him, you can't leave me like this. You let this happen to me. He didn't slap the fruit out of her hand or grab the fruit, grab her by one hand and him, the adversary, with the other hand, and just say, we're going to go and we're going to wait till the Father shows up. We're going to get all this straightened out. No, he didn't. And that's why he was punished. His responsibility was to protect his wife, his family, the planet that he has been given charge of. All part of the plan of salvation. He ate the fruit. Now, he and she are under the umbrella of sin. We violated. We are completely immersed in the fact that we violated. And the consequences were immediate. The spiritual aspect of the physiological change in their bodies and the spiritual altered, whatever. So now they knew that there was a problem. And they were afraid, and they could now tell that they were naked. So I'm assuming that their spirit was so bright that the light beamed out from them to where they really couldn't tell that they were naked. Not saying that that's the truth. I'm just saying that according to my own cogitations, that's how I determine how they knew that they were naked. I don't know. But again, just me trying to figure something out that isn't expressly delineated in the scriptures. So, the Father gave us good advice. The adversary gave us bad advice. We didn't take the Father's advice. We took the adversary's advice. Bam. We found out that the Father was right, but now we have to suffer consequences. Now everyone is under the umbrella of sin. What did the Father do? Made a sacrifice, covered them in the skins, kicked them out of the garden. Violating the Father's command, got them kicked out of the garden. So, then, of course, we go through Adam and Eve having Cain and Abel. They had their situation. Cain got banished because he got jealous. He got jealous because he didn't follow the Father's word. Because he was a hard worker and he was trying to be responsible, and because he was a man of the soil, he worked hard, but he was a hunter more than anything else. They were raised to be men of the soil, but when he went out, not a hunter. He chose to bring not the gifts that the Father delineated, but to try and bring his own gifts. So, in that situation, because the Father blessed Abel, but didn't have the same blessing for Cain was really upset. But the Father went to him immediately and said, hey, whoa, pump the brakes, little buddy. If you do well, you will be blessed. In other words, just do it the way I said it. Don't do it your way. Don't do it any other buddy's way, anybody else's way. Do it the way I tell you, and everything will be fine. But you see, his mind got to be racing over and over, and the adversary tempting with the minion speaking into our spiritual ears. And so he took the advice. He ended up killing his brother. He got banished, kicked out, because he violated. Further on, we see that more and more and more and more people, the children of Cain, were more and more violators and more violent, and to the point to where the Father said, look, we have reached the point to where there is enough sin in the world to where I will make the next adjustment in the plan of salvation. And he culled the numbers down. He had grandfather Noah, and everybody is a child of Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. And if Noah and his wife had any kids after that, I don't think they did. I don't remember reading it, is what I mean, if they did or not. That's why I said I don't think they did. But anyway. So then the flood culled out all of the numbers. The animals that were to traverse after the flood were led into the ark, as well as any artifacts from the antediluvian earth, the pre-flood planet. So, see the little puppy. And so then, Noah, the Father gives Noah a plan. And this is the parameters that I want you to follow for the moment until the next phase. And then, of course, we get to Babel. And at Babel, we see that Nimrod, they were supposed to fill the earth, but he wanted to build a city and stay there. Now, again, nothing wrong with building a city. Nothing wrong with building cities all around the planet, because that was the plan. But his duty in his mind was to build a city and stay there. And so a lot of people were wanting to stay there, because if you pool your resources and if you pool your labor force, then there's going to be a lot more accomplishment if people are diligent, and a lot more production. And then there's going to be more to share. So, I mean, it makes sense what he wanted, but the Father would have blessed them more had they done what they were asked to do. But the point is, The Father had another adjustment that he wanted to make, another dispersal. They did not do what they were told, so the Father commanded them to fill the earth. They decided to stay, so he changed their languages. In changing the languages, there were also certain cognizant aspects that were also disseminated with certain aspects of certain languages. I'm not saying that because you have a different language, you're stupider or less smart. I don't mean that. What I mean is there is intelligence, there is integrity, there is laziness, and all of the temptations that people are to follow, and all of the motivations that the Father gives us. But because of the different languages, they could no longer work together. He said their intelligence, their skill set, because remember, they had traversed and there was pretty amazing metallurgy before the flood. And we have found, some people have found certain things that are pre-flood. Ron Wyatt, it's almost 99% confirmed that he found aspects and parts of the ark. And there was metallurgy and wood treatment, just like it's stated in the scriptures. He took parts of what he had found, and as you may or may not know, they took one of the astronauts went out and helped him, got some seismic equipment, ground penetrating radar, followed along the path. They put a grid system there. They started marking where that they saw rafters and beams and different aspects of certain structural things, items. And then they had some of the rivets analyzed, and they found titanium mixed, I think, with steel and other aspects, even a mineral or two, and maybe sulfur and some other things. They had to really know what they were doing to be able to accomplish this. And they were found up on Ararat, just like the scriptures state. So they got kicked out of that region and sent to fill the earth. Now, as the flood destroyed the earth, Walt Brown came up with a theory that he calls the hydroplate theory. And it's pretty simple. You basically had your earth, and you had just exactly like it says. Even the evolutionists say that the planetoid had continents originally with water stuffs. So you had your atmosphere, you had your planet, you had your bodies of water, but most of the water was in the caverns underneath. So there was a rip that started in one place, could have been from an asteroid, a meteorite, some object hitting somewhere. But whatever it was, the Earth, of course, had a certain amount of pressure and yet a certain amount of underwater aqueous-filled caverns. So it ripped and tore through the planet in both directions. And then this went this way. This went this way eventually. And as that rip collapsed, the waters were forced through the openings. The amount of force from all of the weight of the collapse of those caverns rushing that water out caused cavitation as well as massive erosion. So that as the waters traversed out of the collapsing caverns, it started to create the Atlantic Ocean as it started to collapse, and all of those waters would then bring the murky, muddy water and then flow out of the holes, and then water, of course, seeking its level, pushed the mud and dirt and sediments and then covered the earth that way. Also, that busting up the atmosphere, there was a vapor canopy around the earth that was protecting from radiation. So as these started to precipitate, that added to the waters here. on the planet itself. The mid-Atlantic rift was created, and that allows magma from inside to then, as it splits and separates, because the earth has its rotation and there are currents, just like there are ocean currents, which prove that the earth isn't flat or is evidence that the earth is a sphere. Also, the currents and torrents within the magma itself are moving in their own circuit, to where it ends up causing this to go this way, that to go that way. And then as this splits, it is refilled by the magma, and that magma then solidifies as it cools. Now, when it does that, as it's still a magma state, the magnetic forces from the Earth, based on, you got your sun, you got our moon, and you got the other planets and the other galaxies. So all of those aspects, when this is cooling, all of the alternate waves, magnetic waves, will then be solidified. So I don't think that the poles are shifting, that the magnetism starts here, then all of a sudden it's going to be here, then it swaps and it's here, and that this is what controls it. I think it's more of, as this is cooling, it is subject to freezing those magnetic lines, aligning the magnetic particles within any form of magnetic substance in the matrix of the sediments and of the magma as it cools. But that's just my cogitations on why it appears, as this spreads, that it looks like the poles are shifting, when in fact I think that it's just freezing the magnetic lines wherever it is in the process, and those lines are different because of the sun and the larger planets and the moon, or anything that's magnetic having an effect, because the magnetic aspects of the sun, and also it's not just magnetism, but it's also gravity. Now, the magnetic forces from the sun are affected slightly by the constellations, but also by our own magnetism of the different planets. And each of the magnetisms flow out from the sun and go out to a certain distance. So every time there's a motion and movement in that magnetism, it's like waves. And again, studying that is why I came up with that silly theory. But nonetheless, as it's spreading going this way, on the other side of the earth, of course, you got Asia and you got the Americas. Well, they are moving closer to each other. And that's why we're having earthquakes all around the Pacific Rim, because whereas this is being separated, this is being crushed together. A little bit of getting, but nonetheless, that is why also my theory is, while this mid-Atlantic rift started to separate the continental structure, the distance between Europe, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, as it started to spread early on, it was closer. Now, it was moving fast, but once it started crushing and bouncing off the other side, that's what is causing the friction that is enabling the earthquakes and volcanic activity. Okay, but as it was spreading, the peoples that had gotten to the west coast of the Europe, African, side, they didn't have as far to go on their newly built ships. We know they already knew how to build ships. The Ark is a perfect example. So it would not have taken them as long to get over to what was considered the New World. So we don't have to use the evolutionary theory to say that they only made it by coming over from Russia, China, Japan area through the Aleutian Islands or whatever they call it to get to Alaska, Canada, and come down and fill up the Americas. Again, these are just my postulations. Back to Daniel. Oh, I'm sorry. So we see that the breach, when the earth, the flood, and all of that stuff, and starting all of that. Okay, so we see that Nimrod and all of that, because there's disobedience, there was another dispersion. So then, of course, we get to Abraham. The father introduces himself to Abraham, and he makes a covenant with him. And he says, if you will do what I ask, I will bless all of the nations through your children, specifically a child, most especially. And then, of course, he's given the circumcision. And also we see that he is asked to offer his son. Now, the father forbids human sacrifice. So it's odd. Very, very odd. But we see also that the father never intended to allow grandfather or uncle Abraham to go through with it. He was just showing what he was going to do with his own son. So, grandfather Abraham was given certain promises by the father because he tried to be obedient. But we see that he also got tricked by the adversary with Avimelech, the king of Egypt, saying that Sarah was his sister, and not claiming that she was his wife. Then all of a sudden the king thought she was beautiful and wanted her in his harem. But the father, of course, protected him, both Avimelech and Avraham now, from that particular indiscretion. But you'll see that because of that, there was tension. And so he was kind of ejected from the region or left because of discomfort. But again, he was called to go back to Israel. Now, then he finally gets the promised son. He got impatient. He took advice from Sarai, and he ended up going with Hagar and having Ishmael. So Abraham, his first son was Ishmael. You would have thought that he would have been given the oldest son's rights and privileges. But the thing was, he was grandfather Abraham, or uncle Abraham's son, first son, of course, but he wasn't the son of promise. The father made it clear it would be Sarah that would have that promised child, the lineage that would bring the child promised in the garden, and the child promised that would be a blessing to all nations, speaking of the Messiah. Therefore, wherever Abraham went and discussed this, he was discussing certain prophetic aspects, things that would happen in the future. And when Messiah came to be, that shows that Avram was in fact a prophet to a certain extent, because certain interactions that he had with people, he communicated with them, and I believe the Father gave him certain bits of advice to share with the people of the world. Therefore, he was a prophet. And that gives Muhammad and Christians the right to claim that he's a prophet, because he spoke of future events, and that's what prophets either do. If you're repeating what the Father said, and it is something that's going to happen, it is prophecy. If you're repeating a prophecy that the Father gave to somebody else, you're not a prophet, you're someone who's reading prophecies from a prophet who got the message from the Father above. But both Christianity and Muhammad himself admit that the prophets of the ancient Hebrew scriptures were in fact prophets. And we know that because of the historical events by the nations that they interacted with, literally trying to destroy Israel, were not only not able to destroy them, but then themselves got their butts kicked on many occasions by the Father above. Now we're getting to grandfather Abraham, and he has Isaac, the promised son, in his old age. Sarai, 90 years old when she got pregnant. He was 100 years old when she got pregnant, a year after the Father sent his messenger and hung out with Abraham, overlooking the plains with which would soon become Sodom and Gomorrah as it sunk. I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah before the earthquake that caused the massive rift, which ripped open the land, dropped it down, and changed the topography drastically, and also the weather. So there is his nephew Lot with him. The Father had blessed Abraham and blessed Lot to the point to where each had his own animals, his own team of individuals to take care of those animals, their own team for making clothing and taking care of getting the food ready and all these other aspects. And it got to where both entourages were so huge that grandfather Abraham said, look, there is not enough in this region to sustain both of our companies, as it were. So you are welcome to go anywhere that you want, and I will go anywhere else. He said, I will take the well-watered plain. And Abraham chose to take the wilderness or whatever. So then we get the circumstances at Sodom and Gomorrah where the father destroyed the city, and the only people that were saved were Lot and his 2 daughters. He had eventually, thinking that everyone in the world was dead and they were living in caves, his daughters convinced him to have sex with him, and then they each had children, and they had their own tribes from that particular incest. All right, now down further on, and we get then Isaac. Then Isaac has Jacob and Esau. Jacob was the favored. His arm came out first. They put a string on his arm. Somehow his arm got drawn back in, and Esau came out first, I think. I could be wrong. We can go back and look. But I believe that's the way that it was. And it says that when they had pulled Esau, it says that that hand was firmly gripped around his foot, I guess assisting so that they could then pull him out. And so they named him the Yaakov and Esau. And there was tension and rivalry in that particular group. Esau was the hunter that I accidentally referenced earlier. He was the man of the wilderness, and he was the hunter. But Yaakov, he was basically stay at home, learn how to cook, do stuff around the yard and the house, take care of family business, this, that, and the other. Wasn't as manly and all of that, and we know that there was subterfuge, and his mom helped him to get the birthright of the eldest. Again, his arm had come out first, but his brother actually completely came out first. Therefore, his brother would be technically considered the firstborn. But Yaakov, there was this rite and ritual, supposedly, where the father signs over the birthright, I guess. And so the mother got together with Yaakov, and they used goat hair and Esau's clothes. And Isaac, who was so old, his eyes had gone to where he could not really see very well. And I remember as a child saying, oh, come on, how's that possible? But right now, I can't even read these letters from this close or this close. Way back here, I can almost make it out if I focus. See? It's just these. Wow, it's so bright. Yeah, these little letters right there. I can't read that. So now that I'm old, I understand how difficult it is sometimes. He couldn't see, but he could smell. I mean, he could see, but it was all fuzzy because of cataracts and all that, I'm assuming. Also, they didn't have sunglasses, and with the atmosphere being pure and not having any pollution and being out in the day a lot and all of that, it might have been deterioration of the eyes naturally. So anyway, now, then we have Jacob and Esau. Jacob, after a while, has a rivalry with his son. He gets the birthright. He's afraid that his brother's going to be really angry. He cruises north back to where Abraham lived for a while in Haran. He went because that's where his uncle was. And Haran, they went back up. And of course, there was Laban, his cousin, Abraham's cousin or whatever. And he had some daughters. And so here comes Yaakov, and he's heading up to his family, and then they have their meeting. And he sees Rachel, and he's just like, oh, wow, wait a minute, is Rachel? Rebecca was Isaac's wife, to where they had Jacob and Esau. And then Rachel was the one that he loved. And he worked for 7 years for Laban. They made it a covenant. And after 7 years, he was going to be able to marry Rachel. But when he woke up after the wedding service the night previous, might have had a couple of drinks and all that, and kicking back and just the glory of the aspect, and wakes up the next morning. It's not Rachel, it's Leah. I said Leah had weak eyes. Now, I don't know what that means. For some reason, I was thinking maybe she had, well, it doesn't matter. And he says, look, this wasn't the agreement that we made. I worked 7 years. I worked a week of years for Rachel. I loved her. She is my wife, but you have used trickery and you have defrauded me. He says, I tell you what, go ahead and work another week. You work that week of years, and then you can have Rachel, the one that you love. So he works another week of years. And this is where we get weak, so that when we go to Daniel chapter 9, which is where we are now, it's talking about weeks of years in the formula for the Messiah. But again, I'm not quite ready to go there. So when we have him working for that week, he finally gets Rachel and he marries her. Well, when time comes, he's also, when he gets to marry each wife, whatever, the Laban gives them women for wet nurses and assistants and whatever, to where now, in the entourage, he ends up also having children with these 2 other women, to where he winds up with 12 children. Now, then he traverses back to Israel, leaves Laban because he's tired of getting screwed. He has a vast array of specific animals that he got, because Laban said, I want all of the beautiful animals. You can have all of the ones that have speckles and stripes and are brindle, and just give me the ones that are mostly solid color and best looking. And he said, fine. And so what he did was he found a way to produce more of the speckled and striped, because the rule was he got the speckled and striped. And of course, Laban thought that he was defrauded at the end when he wasn't. No, because it wasn't Laban out there doing the effort in making all of these animals. So then, finally, after that tension, Yaakov says, I've had enough. I feel it's time for me to go back. And he grabs all of his wives, all of his kids, all of his animals, and he starts the trek back to Israel. Now, to save time, because I waste way too much time on rabbit tracks, we're just going to go ahead and get to where they make it back to Israel. Esau hears that he's coming back somehow. So he's afraid of Esau. He sends all of his less favored family members out on the front line. But Esau loves these people, and he's glad to see them, and he's way beyond all of that. He has so much of his own stuff. The father blessed him. Evidently, the father allowed him to drop his hostility and just be thankful for what he had. Sure, of course, he was angry that he got burnt out of his birthright, but nonetheless, even being number 2 of Isaac's kid, that gets blessings if he's good. So there wasn't any rivalry when he got back, but still, Jacob had a lot on his mind and a lot on his plate and a lot in his entourage, and he wanted to go be by himself. I don't think he trusted his brother, even though he was being nice. I could be wrong. So he ends up staging a place in Bethel, where the father literally sends a messenger, an angel, whatever, to hang out with him, and they end up wrestling through the night while the rest of the entourage, is going their traverse, sleeping at night, traveling during the day, traveling mostly during the cool hours if it was super, super hot. But again, the earth was a little bit different back then. It had not gotten to the state that it is now, to where there are vast deserts and and regions where stuff can't grow because of the aridity of the air and the lack of moisture. That came when the continents buckling started to rise some areas and cause valleys in other areas, and the peaks became the mountain ridges. And the higher the mountains got, the more difficult it was for the moisture to bring rain to the areas, and then they became drought ridden and then deserts. So, nonetheless, man, an hour and a half. So then we get to where they're in Israel. He's at Bethel. He has a situation. He sets up an altar, just like his grandfather Abraham did, because this was a special area, Bethel, the house of the Almighty. So then he gets to another place, and he's making a place for his kids and all of that, and they're doing their basic chores. But man, Joseph isn't a very favored brother, and Rachel, around the time she's about to have her second child, which is Benjamin, the son of Jamin, or Yamin, the son of Yamin, or the plurality of the Almighty. Ben being son, as in Ben-Hur, son of Hur. And Yamin, Yah is the name for God, and Min is usually a plurality sometimes. I am not an expert, so I'm just going to stop because I could be wrong about that. But I know that the name that we say Benjamin comes from Benjamin. Anyway. But Rachel dies during the birth of Benjamin. Yaakov suggested a name based on what he had heard, and she says, no, his name shall be Benjamin. They named him that as she was dying. And then they grow up. They're in the new part. They're dealing with the Amalekites, I guess, and then in Shechem, there was the prince that ended up taking Dinah, I think, and kidnapping her and falling in love with her and raping her, and then the brothers went and did some devious things, and because they didn't like her being kidnapped or being raped. And then all of a sudden they didn't like, of course, him saying, oh, we'll make it all better. We'll just make her my princess. In other words, a concubine. And again, that didn't sit well. I mean, they were, children of the Almighty. And here was this pagan wanting to annex part of their family by rape. And of course, that didn't sit well, but they didn't handle it properly. They didn't go to the father and do what he said. They just reacted and said, okay, we'll let you marry her. Just let us circumcise all of your men. And of course, you get a part of your body hacked off. You're going to be going through a bloody time. You got healing, and it's a very delicate area. And then they use that convalescent time to then go in and slaughter many of the people that were involved with the kidnapping and rape of their sister. And again, because of that, the father disseminated parts of the population. They had to end up leaving. There was discomfort, another violation, another dispersal. Well, while they're going through all of that, again, they end up selling Joseph into slavery to a bunch of Bedouins who ended up carrying him off and selling him as a slave in Egypt. So we see that Potiphar is taking care of him. Takes him in, this, that, and the other. He is so successful that he benefits Potiphar's endeavors. But then his wife gets a little bit randy. And Randy Whiffy, the Randy wife, tries to come on to our buddy. Joseph. Well, he's not going to have any of that. She's married. And he's not going to have anything of that. She's pagan. He's not going to have anything of that because he is literally an employee of his vassal master. And he will not violate that office with a violation that would then cause him to lose credence. Because again, as a man of honor, one must maintain acts of honor. So she accused him when he refused her and got him in trouble, and he's in prison. And over 2 years, the father allows him to, sorry, I'm doing that because of the intensity of the light inside of the screen. Anyway, so he's now in prison, some people have dreams. The baker and the butcher, the wine taster, have dreams. He interprets those dreams. The one ends up being reinstated, but because he was a violator, he got executed. The other guy was reinstated. He got to go back and serve the king because he wasn't a violator. He got the ride. He got exactly what Joseph said. But then another 2 years, 2 more years, he's still in prison, if I remember correctly. And then, all of a sudden, King Dozier has a dream. He wants to know the interpretation. Now, all of a sudden, his cupbearer gets the idea, I remember the guy, the reason I'm here, and tells him about Joseph. So, Dozier calls. If in fact Dozier is the king, he had called, and so Joseph had to get all bathed and shaved and presentable, and they put some decent clothes on him because he went before the king of Egypt. And as he goes before the king of Egypt literally goes through the process of explaining what he can of the dream. The father gives Joseph the interpretation. And it's basically the 7 years of lean, the week of plenty, then the week of lean. 7 years, the week of plentiness, where there's going to be a lot of rain. There's going to be opportunities for them to grow a lot of crops. And then he was told to store a bulk of those crops because there were going to be a week or 7 years of no rain, to where there's going to literally change the topography. It's going to be such a drought. So during the 7 years of plenty, during the first couple of years, Joseph engineered, designed, and had built these massive bins to store the grain. Ron Wyatt found these bins, and I will put links to his research so that I don't have to explain something that somebody that actually is a valued part of the kingdom had done, found them, presented them, took a lot of the aspects to the Galbraith technical laboratories, where they test all types of things, such as they tested aspects of the ark. They tested aspects of other various artifacts that Ron Wyatt had found. And such as aspects of the ark, aspects of things, and possibly some of the grains and things that he had found in Egypt. So he found the bins that were stored there. But also we find that there are a series of canals that are called Joseph's channels or Joseph's canals. He had them dig canals deep into the desert, so that during the time of plenty, when there was a lot of rain, he would literally give them the ability to irrigate miles and miles of many square miles more than they could have had they not put the canals in there to water even more deep into the desert regions or the wilderness, however you want to look at it. Therefore, they had so much and such giant bins. I don't remember the capacity calculations, but he did find some grains that were way back from the old days that were still in and around that area. It's so arid that they had not been germinated, therefore they're still viable seeds. And I think he had them tested, and they were 4,000 or 5,000 years old. I don't remember. But again, his research is viable and valuable. But Joseph, being there under Dozier, because of all that he had done, and he also helped to build some of the very first pyramids. That's why that step pyramid is so unique. It was one of the very first and must have been like their first attempt. Anyway, so as we see Egypt during the years of plenty, storing all of that, it got to where the drought was so bad that parts of Asia, parts of Africa, parts of Europe were going through the drought. And these people were sending emissaries and messengers, finding out that there was grain in Egypt, then sending caravans and, ships and stuff if they wanted to traverse the Mediterranean, because that would be much easier for some people, go from northern Egypt to southern Europe. So all of the people, they started doing trade, and it got to the point to where people didn't have any money. The drought was so bad that they ended up having to give up their possessions. They had to give up their lands. And so Egypt became an empire solely because the father allowed Yosef, to then give good advice to the king. The king took that advice and it raised the level and value from a kingdom, from a province to a kingdom to an empire. Then we see down through the ages, Uncle Moses' time. And then we get into a major prophet who has proven very avidly to be a prophet. Torah is, in fact, a template for a perfect society. If you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal, you don't rape, you don't murder, you don't enslave, you don't deceive, you don't do anything to trick or evade or screw anybody for any reason, and you're going to have a perfect society, because you don't have to lie to cover up anything you've done wrong. You don't have to cheat because you don't have to steal. If everything you do is honorable, and then the Father can bless us. And in blessing us, other people are supposed to see those blessings and want them for themselves. But because they always wanted to get around Torah instead of getting because of and through Torah, earning through Torah, success through honesty, honor, and propriety. Deuteronomy 28, the blessings and the cursings. The list of the blessings are: you'll be blessed in the field, you'll be blessed in your endeavors, you'll be blessed in the womb, you'll be blessed in the wombs of your animals, you'll be blessed in your businesses, you'll be blessed in your anything and everything. It says, but if you try to cheat and get around Torah, the list of curses is even bigger. Whereas the blessings would overtake us and tackle us to the point of a giggle fest and a tickle fest, the curses are the others. They will overtake us and knock us down and slam us into the dirt and mud. So that's why the Father gave us the parameters of what is right and what is wrong. And then we tested it out in life. When we honored the Father's word, we were blessed. Look at how Israel grew. When we violated, we got kicked out of the land. After Solomon's time, you see, Solomon literally celebrated the feasts and festivals. When they dedicated the temple, it was so amazing, and the Father showed up, and the smoke filled the temple, and the Father's presence was there. And there was a revival, and they enjoyed the feasts and festivals. And that lasted for some time. But then he started to marry pagan wives and make edicts and make agreements and covenants and contracts with the pagans. Well, when he started letting the pagans marry him, he started to then acquiesce to his wife's demands. Their demands were, we want to practice the religion of our people. And instead of him saying, no, you're going to have to stop that at the expense of pissing off your parents, excuse the expression, and cultural liaisons and aspects of your family and friends and culture, he acquiesced to them. And then he started to then become more and more backslidden, to where he started hanging out with them and sitting in on their rituals and stuff. And the Father brought the hammer down, just like he said he would. And then, of course, we get the Lamentations. Now we've got King Solomon, the guy who wrote the Proverbs, books of wisdom, and now he's lamenting about things. He is saying, what is life about? This is just so miserable. Why? Because his relationship with the Father had been diminished, but yet his relationship with his wives took everything out of the way, took all of his time, all of his focus, all of his attention. He degraded as a spiritual being and became a carnal being, and then the curses took over. All of a sudden, then the Philistines and all of the enemies started coming in and kicking the crap out of him. And they started walking away from Torah a little bit over time. So then we get into the times to where we got kicked out of the land because we got further and further away from Torah. And then now we are at the captivity we discussed earlier, 587 when they were carried off and the city and temple were destroyed. 605 BC, I guess maybe when they were carried off. And then city and temple got destroyed. I'm not quite sure. I should know. Forgive me. So I don't remember everything perfectly, but I usually go to try to confirm it and all that. But anyway, so now the 70 years, the time is up. It's time for them to prepare and to go back. So what I've been reading is Daniel's discussion of why we got kicked out of the land. And again, departing from your precepts, from your judgments, your commandments, and the tenets with which we were to follow. Do this, don't do that. Can't you read the signs? That's a 60s song, I believe. Anyway, neither have we hearkened unto your servants the prophets. Remember, the earlier prophets kept saying, the Father wants you to come back. Isaiah kept coming in during the time of Hezekiah. And he was saying, hey, you're going to die. The Father has determined that you're going to die. Get your stuff in order. And he cried and said, please, 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 help me get my health back. This was around 721 before the Common Era, because Baladan, the son of Baladan, the king of Babylon, sent a letter to Hezekiah, and said, we hear that you're sick and that you're on the point of death. We wish you the best of luck. Or we heard that maybe you're getting better and whatever. Nonetheless, 721 BC, they sent that letter. And so we know that that was around the 15-year mark when he was told that he was going to be dying soon. And the Father said he would give him another 15 years. So we know that during Isaiah's time, right at Hezekiah's time, since he served for Hezekiah and several other kings, we know that that prophecy was right around 721, because we know that that's when the letter came from Babylon, giving us kind of a target, because pretty soon after that, we also get the aspect of being able to come back to the land as well. So, because we didn't hearken, we got kicked out. Got our butt kicked, got carried off to Babylon. Assyria took off the northern kingdom. Babylon took off the southern kingdom. Why? Because the southern kingdom did not learn their lesson. In Ezekiel, look up Aholah and Aholibah. They were the two sisters, and it's the story of how the Samaria, Shechem, and Judah, the southern kingdom, how they both got carried away by the two different groups. Jerusalem and Judea, they got carried away by Babylon, because when Assyria got the opportunity to conquer the northern kingdom and disperse those folk, the Judeans said, we're so much better than those Jews. We're Hebrews. They're Jews. They're Jews. Sorry, I think that's my Donald Trump impression, which I've never done, never wanted to do. Never supported Trump, but I know one thing. Trump is a Jesuit Mason, whereas Hillary is a Muslim Mason. Hillary wants to establish Sharia law. Abadan Humin wants to establish Sharia law. That Ilmar wants to establish Sharia law. Sharia law is a caste system. Sharia law allows rape. It allows men to beat their wives. It allows slavery. It allows prejudicial actions. It allows anything and everything that Islam, as a pirate network, demands they have the right to do. Again, Islam states that because Allah said that Muhammad is the final prophet, anyone that doesn't accept Allah and Muhammad is considered not a real human being, but a lesser human being, a lesser evolved human being, a less valid human being, and they are to be mistreated until they're leveraged into belief in Allah and his messenger, or they are to be mistreated, pay the extortion money called jizya, or to be mistreated and harassed until they are eventually executed because they wouldn't accept Allah and his messenger. Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I have to be honest with you. It's difficult for me, since I know that Muhammad was not a prophet. It's easy to prove that he's not a prophet. How? Muhammad was clear, honest, and he was accurate when he said Abraham was a prophet, because he was. Moses was a prophet, because he was. David the king was a prophet. We know that. And he was. So then the one called Jesus, Yahusha, as in Joshua, the son of Yahuwah, the Almighty, Yahusha was a prophet. anyone that says that the prophet of the first century was not a prophet, all you've got to do is read where he predicted not one stone would be left on another during the destruction of 70 AD. And if you want to say, well, under some auspices that might be considered written after the fact, just go to Matthew chapter 24, corroborated with Luke chapter 21, where it doesn't just discuss the destruction of the city in 70 AD, or 70 of the Common Era, but it discusses our very time. It says how there's going to be wars, rumors of wars. There's going to be pestilence. There's going to be earthquakes, radical storms, signs in the heavens, signs in the skies. There's going to be diseases of all radical types, earthquakes. I believe I said the famines. And signs in the heavens, such as the blood moons. But it even discusses the moon turning to a blood color. We had blood moons recently on the Hebrew holy days based on the lunar calendar, just as we were commanded by Uncle Moses within the last few years. When it comes to wars and rumors of wars, we know that before the First World War, you had your setup of your Prussian War, your 1812, your First World War, your Second World War. Then there was the Cold War that covers the rumors of wars. And, of course, your police actions like Vietnam, Korea. So, again, and then with all of the wars, pestilence comes in because when you have death, then you have disease. When you have death, you also have bugs and vermin coming in because of all of the dead bodies being cast out and rotting and stuff like that. And so what we literally see is that the Messiah is a prophet. I mean, because everything that I just said can easily be found in the history books and on the news every single day we watch it. In Revelation, it talks about an image that speaks great blasphemy. Now, you are looking to me on a video. It might be on a smartphone, which is an image that has audio. It might be on a laptop. It might be on a desktop computer. It might be on some other screen, like an iPad. It may be on a TV that somebody downloaded it, recorded it, put it onto and were able to show it on a TV. Images that have audio. There you have it. And what is it? That is 99% of all information that comes out of these audio-assisted video components of technology? Evolution and the occult. That is great blasphemy. We are not to worship the Father the way pagans worship their deities. Evolution is a religion. It is not science. You see, I have a video. I will post some of the links up. Basically, he's a PhD historian, and he shows how the tenets of evolution can be traced back to ancient Hindi reincarnation, re-evolution tenets, cogitations way back there. And he also shows how the Greek historians had several people go spend time with the Hindis because they were amazed at this information. And they documented a bunch of this stuff, took it back, and then they had their cogitation sessions. And so then those writings were handed down when Greek took over and conquered the earth. But then when Greece was not so much conquered by Rome, but annexed by Rome, conquered in a way, annexed in another way, they absorbed through intrigue and other aspects and war. Yeah, that was true. The Khyber and all of that stuff. So then Rome winds up with this information. And Rome, of course, has been in charge all this time. So that's why it was so easy for them to create evolution. All Erasmus Darwin had to do was have access to those particular writings in his own language, and then he shared them with Charles Darwin, his grandson. Both were Masons. Both Darwin had to be at least a 30th degree, and I believe Erasmus was a 33rd degree. Erasmus coincides similitude to, say, we had Albert Pike here in America. In the 1840s, 1860s, Albert Pike was writing to 1880s, whatever, his letter about the 3 world wars that we literally just discussed. And I need to put a link for that there also. It was Albert Pike who made it clear that the 30th, 31st, 32nd, and 33rd degrees in the Masonic order of the Scottish Rite were fully aware of the fact that Lucifer was the god of the Masonry. But he makes it clear in an edict in his Morals and Dogma, one of the books that he'd written, how they're never allowed to tell anyone in the lower echelon. That way, you got a bunch of people thinking they're part of a benevolent organization, working their tails off and contributing to a terrorist network. So now, we've been separated from the land because we disobeyed the Torah. We have been taken into captivity because we disobeyed the prophets calling us back to Torah. And as promised, we are now being sent back to the land because that was also a prediction. Now, Daniel chapter 8 and 332, before the Common Era, as you've heard me state, possibly, we have Daniel chapter 8 was discussing, sorry, got a big nose and it itches. It was discussing how Medo-Persia would be conquered by Macedonia. Alexander the Great, the son of Philip the Great, had already gone through, took care of some of the aspects of conquering his nation, came over to northern Turkey and up near the Caspian Sea, came on down, took out Issus, took out the region, conquered it from Darius. And as Darius retreated back deeper into his own areas, he came south, took Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, of course, on the way down to that. Then when he passed by Jerusalem, went down to Gaza, conquered Gaza, sent up a letter to Jerusalem and asked for conscripts and asked for money so that he could go fight Darius. And then he went to conquer Egypt. While he was conquering Egypt, he got a letter from the high priest. As soon as he conquered Egypt, instead of going directly east, probably the easier traverse, and being able to cruise all the way and go directly to fight Darius, he ended up going back to Jerusalem to destroy Israel, because the high priest sent a letter back saying, well, we can't give you conscripts and we can't give you money to fight Darius. We are under Darius's authority because we got kicked out of our land for violating the Father's commandments. So it says that Alexander the Great had determined in his heart to teach the entire world who they should actually be keeping their oaths to. So he went to Jerusalem. He sent them a note and said, I am Negro Montoya. You kill my father. Prepare to die. Sorry, that's from The Princess Bride, a very poor rendition. But anyway, he was going to let them know, he let them know that he was on his way to destroy them. They were worried. They prayed. They fasted. The father said, get up as if it's the highest of holy days tomorrow. Go out in a procession, meet Alexander. And this is where Alexander gets the title the Great. Not just because he conquered the earth so swiftly, but because when he went, it says he came up over the region called the Prospect. So he was coming up from the south. The Dead Sea is to his right. He's coming up from the south, and he comes up over this region, and as you see on the hill, you look down to the valley, and where the valley rises up to the hill where Moriah, the top of the mountain, is, that's where the city and the walls were. It says that as he was going down into the valley, he was met by the priests. The high priest was actually in the front, not hiding behind them. So obviously he had more faith than the average priest today. And I'm talking about priest of any religion. And so it says, when the father saw when Alexander saw the mitre on the headdress of the high priest, it had the father's name. It says, when he saw the name, he adored the name. He became soft in his heart, compassionate. Now, people from Syria and people from Lebanon were with him. I guess they were interpreters. And they were hoping that Alexander was going to kill the Jews, kill the Hebrews, actually. No, Jews, whatever you want to call them. I don't use the word Jew, except for evil Hebrews, because that's what the Nazis called them. Not Yehudi, but they called them Jews. So I don't like the term. It's like the N-word for black folk. Now, unless you're from Niger or Nigeria, then they are not a Nigerian. They are not a Niger from Niger, but I think it's Niger, so therefore they would be Nigers. But over here, of course, people use it as a derogatory term. And because it's a derogatory term, I don't even like it when blacks use it. But right now, that's not what I'm trying to discuss. The point is that because I rabbit tracked, I lost what I was thinking of. So, nonetheless, because we violated the Father's word, got kicked out of the land. We are on our way back to the land. They have now started to rebuild the city. They have started to rebuild the walls. They started to rebuild the temple, certain aspects. So then they got to where they had completed the walls, got the foundation back together, and they're celebrating this fact. Daniel is talking about why we got kicked out of the land. Well, we just saw. We violated. We were promised if we would violate, we'd get kicked back. So then we just saw that Daniel is referring to Jeremiah's prophecy that we would come back in 70 years. And so he is praying, trying to get his heart right, seeking the Father, that the Father would then prepare them so that they can go back. Oh, yeah, righteousness belongs to you. But unto us confusion of faces as at this day to the men of Yehuda and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Unto all Israel that are near and that are far off, through all the countries where you have driven them because of their trespasses that they have trespassed against you. So he claims his own sins and he admits the sins of his contemporaries and ancestors. Oh yeah, what belongs to us is confusion of face, to our kings, our princes, our fathers, because we sinned against you. To Yah, our mighty one, belong mercies and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. Neither have we obeyed your voice, O Yah, our mighty one, to walk in your ways, that you set in front of us by your very servants. Yes, all Israel has transgressed your law, even departing, that they might not obey your voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of Yah, because we have sinned against him, conferring back to a prophecy. Again, showing that the prophets of the Old Testament are real prophets. Now, because we know that they're prophets, and because of Alexander the Great, that's where I was, when he saw the name of the Father, and they said to him, their interpreters said, why are you getting so close to them? Don't you know that these people are rebels? And plus, they were priests. They had their knives on them for sacrifice. He literally could have been assassinated by these people. But instead, they were assured by the Father above that something good would happen. When he adored the name and they asked him why he was getting so close, he said, in my cogitations, before I was to come on this campaign, I had a vision. And that vision, I saw someone dressed very much like this telling me to come over and be successful. Dave South Revised. I'm paraphrasing. So, as he approached the high priest, and with this newly found adoration, it says that the priest took him into the city, showed him Daniel chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8 discusses Macedonia conquering Medo-Persia. When he conquered Darius as predicted, he had already read it. When he was conquering Darius, he hadn't beat him yet. He just had the success that was promised. But when he conquered Darius, he knew that that prophecy was valid. He experienced personally that the Father does discuss aspects. Isaiah 46:10. He tells us things before they happen, so that we will know that He is the Almighty, ever-present one. Isaiah 45 something. It says, I am Yahuwah. I create light. I create evil. I do all these things for my purposes. Why did he create evil? To lead us into sin. Why? So that righteousness would have a contrast. Also, so that he and the Messiah could go through the process of salvation, redemption, and reconciliation to prove by putting themselves and extending themselves to the furthest extent. The Father made the universe out of his own material. It says he breathed that material into existence, sent each particle to its place with the pits of gravity and magnetism that were with what he sent out in the formula. That was drawing certain materials together so that they could coalesce to be planets. Some could coalesce to be stars. Then those stars would coalesce into galaxies. And the materials of the planets could gather together, and each planet could be as it was designed. And then as everything is working in its harmony, on the fourth day, as everything is traversing and going to where it's supposed to be, there was enough of gravitational and magnetic forces to draw and compact a lot of the materials in the stars to where they ignited, on the fourth day. On the fourth day at 186,000 miles per second, it did not take very long for the light of those stars to reach the Earth. Now, it only takes 8 to 9 seconds for the sunlight to hit the Earth. So, as soon as dawn hit, didn't matter. As long as the sun was lit, 8 seconds later, the Earth is bathed in that glory. So the plants that had been germinated the day before, now they had sunlight that they could consume. The soil was well watered because of the aquifers. And so the plant life had what it needed to exist. And on the fourth day, we see that human life and animal life. Because when the seas were created, the fish and certain birds were created. And of course, so we have the starlight only being 4 days away. So as they go to their place, by the time, because again, the humans are going to be up during the day, and then, of course, sleeping at night. But by their very first night, the stars, that light had already reached the Earth. Because the sun is 93 million miles away, it takes 8 seconds to get here. They could have been 1,000 million miles away, and it would only have taken a couple of hours for the sunlight to get to us. Now, I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know. I haven't done any math on how far and this, that, and the other. I'm just saying that based on what physics and scientists have told us, easily by the fourth day, that's the starlight could have hit us by nighttime. Nonetheless, anyway, back to where we are. So Daniel is discussing things and how we violated and what got us kicked out, and how it was our leaders that were not honoring the Father, and the people started to stray because they saw the leaders get away with it, and the leaders were blessed, so they thought it was a good thing to follow. And so, as you see, this is why we, as followers, are to scrutinize our leaders and make sure we keep them in line, because you see, they are the ones who most people look to and follow. So we have to police ourselves, and we have to police our leaders. Do not let a leader talk you into violating Torah. Strike that person down with the word. They say Bible thumpers. In other words, strike their authority down and say, you are no longer a leader, because our people suffered every time we violated the Torah. So you are now under arrest, and you will be prosecuted to the full extent of Torah. You are removed from authority until you adjust your behavior, until you adjust your rhetoric, and until you adjust your mentality. You are no longer an authority because you can't be trusted as a source of information. Okay. So he says, oh yeah, according to all your righteousness, I beg you, let your anger and your fury be turned away from us, this city, from your holy mountain, because of our sins, for the iniquity of our fathers and those of Jerusalem, your people. They are become an approach. by all that are about us. In other words, the very nations that would want to seek the Father because of our great relationship with him, because we violated and we became just like the pagans, they don't want anything to do with us because we're just another deviant tribe. I haven't been drinking my coffee. And so, wow, it's cold. Now, therefore, O Yah, hear the prayer of your servant and his supplications, and cause your face to shine upon your sanctuary, because it's desolate for your sake. In other words, because of what you had stated, it has been destroyed. Yah, hear, Yah, forgive, hearken, and accomplish. Do not defer for your own sake, because again, he's also discussing the fact that the Father promised that we would go back, but it all starts with repentance, admitting what you've done, and then knowing that you should be sorry for what you did. By the way, when Muhammad took from these verses, that's why they attack people that don't do things the way he established it, because he says that his messages from God are more important than the prophets in this testament, and these testimonies, I mean. He says that his words supersede these people. Even though they're true prophets, he claims to be the last and final prophet. Now, he was spoken of in the Hebrew scriptures, but he was never prophesied by any Islamic writing. I did look into that. So, anyway, it says, while he was praying, an angel came and said, at the beginning of your supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore, understand the matter and consider the vision. We are about to get into the accomplishments of Messiah, the accomplishments of Messiah, actions, activities, and accomplishments, and certain things that will be accomplished amongst those deeds that will be part of the redemption, a reconciliation, salvation process. Know, therefore, and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. Even in 7 weeks, 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, the wall, even in troublous times. We just covered that. Remember how they were building the walls, the Jordanians, the Proto-Philistines, the Philistines, and all of these other groups were coming and attacking them for trying to rebuild their region and their temple and their city, because they're behind fortified walls. They're protected from the marauders and the attackers and the raids and the pillaging. The proto-Muslims. Actually, some of the sons of Esau, because it's said that he will be like a donkey, and his throat will be at other people's throats. And others will be at his throat. And as we see, what do we see about the Muslims? They're trying to choke everybody else out, and everybody else is trying to defend themselves from the attacks. I'm not saying Esau is the father of Muslims. I'm saying that the mentality of Esau, the hunter, he did not have as much desire to know the Father, whereas Jacob ended up becoming very involved. But then again, it was also because the Father initiated a relationship. So we are not allowed to condemn, because every person goes through what the Father has previously prescribed for them, because when the Father prophesied that evil would happen, evil has to happen. That means that people have to do that evil. Therefore, those people have to have the mentality to accomplish that and fall into those circumstances. So therefore, if the Father causes a machine to cause problems, you can't hate the machine, because it's doing what it's designed to do, what it's programmed to do as well, because we have technology, so we have programs controlling our machines. That's why Messiah said, do not condemn people, and do not be dismayed when evil overcomes good, because the Father will eventually make all things right. But until then, eternal lessons must be learned in this finite timeline. So, now, he confirmed with so again, 62 weeks. Excuse me. Know and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore until Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 62 weeks. 60. 62 plus 7 is 69 times 7. 463 years. See, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. But look it up here. That's verse 26. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment, this is verse 25, chapter 9 of Daniel, to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 plus 62, the 69 weeks. The times, again, the troublous times were Ezra, Nehemiah, and Daniel, and Zechariah, and Yahusha, the high priest. All right, so he comes after 69 times 7. Says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, a willing sacrifice. And the people of the prince shall come and shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And at the end it shall be like a flood. And to the end of the war, desolations are determined. Again, it was the war, the Maccabean War ahead of time. And then the revolt in 70 of the Common Era. So we see that 49 years after Messiah the Prince was cut off, but not for himself. So even we see that he's called the Messiah twice in 2 separate verses in succession. And we also see that it is 490 years, but 49 years from the destruction of the city and the temple, Messiah shows up and is cut off, but not for himself. And now, let's see what is to be accomplished. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression. In other words, let people know that they sinned, get them to stop sinning. In other words, just like it was prophesied, he will turn their hearts to Torah. All right. Finish transgression to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity. He is our Passover lamb. It says, to bring in everlasting righteousness. When he was executed and rose from the grave, that confirmed the Father's promises, and when the Father then allowed by his Spirit to be able to then indwell the followers as he did the Messiah, because he taught them to come back to Torah. He taught them to honor Torah, and he showed them by example how to honor Torah in sincere humility. So, an end to sins, make a reconciliation for iniquity, bringing in everlasting righteousness to seal up the vision and the prophecy. Again, isn't that funny how Daniel here in number 9 is telling us about prophecies from the past, and yet also the prophecies coming in chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12. And so sealing up these visions and prophecies. All of these things were concluded in the Messiah's life. And then, of course, it says, and 49 years later, the city and the temple are destroyed. Now, when Alexander the Great, seeing Daniel chapter 8, conquered Darius, he had the Septuagint translated into his native tongue, so that by the time of Messiah's birth, when the Magi, the magistrates, came from Babylon, and they brought the gold, the frankincense, the myrrh to the Messiah, the new prince. As a magistrate, it was their duty to come to the local magistrate, talk to the authorities, and let them know their plans and their procedures, what they're going to try to accomplish. When they went to Herod, they told them, we are here to seek the new Hebrew king. And he says, well, I'm the king of the Hebrews. He says, no, it's a child, be about 2 years old. It took us that long to get here. We saw the sign up in the skies. We saw the constellation alignments, but it was a pretty tough couple of years. We finally got here, and we're here to share with the new king. So after they left, of course, you know the Christmas story. This is the time of year, the Christmas story. And they gave the gifts. And then right after that, of course, Joseph and Mary and the boy went to Egypt for a time. And that way he could say, out of Egypt, I have called my son. Because, of course, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph traversed, came back. Now, Jacob, he only went as a bone, as a bag of bones. But then, of course, he said, no, he was alive when he was, he was alive when he was there. But he said, hey, when I die, you got to carry my bones back. And they did. And anyway, I don't know everything, nor can I. So anyway, see, I keep throwing myself off with all of these rabbit tracks. 2 hours and 17 minutes. So when the magistrates came, and Herod heard about the new king, after they left, he called the local ravim, the local rabbis. They travel in packs sometimes to confirm, and also to make certain sometimes that the information is accurate. Anyway, so then that's why, of course, he tried to slaughter, to get rid of any usurpers that would take his position, because he completely misunderstood the situation. Besides, it didn't matter. They had taken off to Egypt. He didn't know that. But nonetheless, when the rabbis came to him, they said, yes, we also saw the constellation alignments in the heavens. We noticed that Daniel chapter 9 formula literally should start with now or recently. And so they showed him Daniel chapter 9, what we are looking at here, this very formula. And they had it in Greek because Daniel 8 was shown to Alexander the Great. And so he had the Septuagint, the entire Old Testament in Greek. So the evolutionists that come to us now and say, oh, you can't trust the Hebrew scriptures because there is not a single fact that corroborates anything. Well, the Septuagint is an exact example that people found it valid and did something useful. And then that gave them the ability to show that this formula was written before the fact. You can't say that it wasn't, because the Septuagint is proof that these scriptures existed before 332, before the Common Era. So when it was shown to Herod, he had to send to Rome and to the magistrates in Constantinople and tell them, hey, these guys have viable prophecy. It has been shown to me. You need to know, because his duty was to inform his bosses of what's going on in his region. Because he was just a local magistrate, only in that region. And he was from Idumea, a place within Israel's borders, so he was a local native. But he was subservient to Rome. So that's why Christianity used the Old Testament and pretended that they were in a direct line from the followers of the Messiah. But the thing that they don't tell you, and people forget, is when Rome was conned by the religious leaders of the Jews, not the Hebrews were the honorable ones that became believers. When they got Rome to murder the Messiah, then they continued after the resurrection to hound Rome and demand that Rome help their leaders hunt down these followers of this radical prophet. Now, when Rome, over the next couple hundred years, hunted down these believers, they gathered up the writings. When they hunted down the Gentile converts from the original disciples who became apostles, they slaughtered them and they gathered up their writings. As we see in the letters that Saul and John and Peter and James and the others wrote and sent to the congregations to encourage them and remind them to honor and obey Torah and to do as the Father has expressed in writing and in the life of his Son, the Messiah. So all of these letters were written in Hebrew they were sent to the local congregations who were overseen by Hebrews, and then they would take those Hebrew writings and they would have the local people translate them into the native tongue of the region. That way, they always had a Hebrew version of the eyewitness accounts, and then they had versions that the local folk could read in their own dialect. Not only is it considerate, but it's beneficial. The only thing is, Rome, when they murdered them, they gathered up every single bit of writing that they could. You see, because they had to rewrite the narrative so they could inculcate their pagan doctrines. And then, of course, after the apostles were slaughtered, after the disciples of the apostles were basically hunted down to almost extinction and their writings were gathered up, we see that then Constantine got together. Constantine worshipped Mithra. Mithra was a sun god. Now, he didn't have anything to do with the Hebrew Scriptures, but he was fully aware of the fact that the Hebrew Scriptures had viable prophecy and eyewitness accounts as well. So, what we have then is them rewriting the first century after decades of cogitation. Go to Nicaea and look at the Nicene Creed. Look at the edicts created in Nicaea, somewhere between 313 to 336 of the Common Era. It actually extends before and after, but these are the numbers that I remember most often because of certain edicts that came out. And so then we see that they, by the 300s, they had made having a Hebrew copy of the Old Testament or a Hebrew copy of the New Testament absolutely illegal on pain of death. They made it illegal for people to honor the tenets of Torah and that they were to follow the tenets of Christianity. The tenets of Christianity are taking old solstice celebrations. You got your spring and your fall solstices, the shortest day in the beginning towards the longest day. The day that the day is the shortest, the day that it starts rising towards whatever. You may know better than I do about how it works. But anyway, Easter and Christmas, all right? The resurrection of the sun coming to be able to have longer days, or the death of the sun, you know, where we turn our clocks back and stuff. Don't know why. It's a waste of time. If they were to split it right in half, just move it to the middle instead of moving it an hour ahead and then taking it back, just leave it a half hour there, leave people alone. You know, that way you don't have to change your getting up structure. Everything can be, because anyway, I'm wasting time. So anyway, so we see all of that. Now, man, this is so long. For me to keep this under 2.5 hours, I'm going to have to wrap this up in less than 5 minutes and 10 seconds. So this is how Christianity and Islam, they point back to true prophets, but then they say that they are the ones. Christianity says they're the only ones who know how to interpret it. And then Islam says, yeah, those were prophets, but we supersede them with our prophecies. Now, the earth has scientific aspects. It talks about the earth moves in its circuit. It talks about how the sun moves in the constellations. It discusses the hydrological cycle. It says that the earth hangs on nothing. The Greeks believed that Atlas, I think, was holding up the earth on his shoulder. The ancient Hindus believed that roar, that it was an elephant that was holding up roar the planet. Now in Islam, he wanted to be smarter than anybody else, and Muhammad tried to act like he was so aware and so scientific and so knowledgeable and such a prophet that he said, yeah, well, the earth, which is flat, sits on a whale. And there's the earth getting hit by the water. Anyway, but Modern technology shows that the earth does hang on nothing and it doesn't sit on anything. Now, not only that, but I believe it's either chapter 18, maybe, where Muhammad says that the sun sets in a murky, muddy pool somewhere on earth. The sun is 2.7 million miles around. The earth is only like 24,000 miles around and 93 million miles away, thereabout. Okay, so there's no way that the sun could set on the earth. Now, that shows that he is not a prophet in any way, that there is no science in Islam. Not only does the earth not sit on a whale, not only is the earth not flat, not only does the sun not set in a murky pool somewhere on earth, but not a single utterance of Muhammad's ever came true. He was never able to discuss future events that happened eventually. Now, we see that the Hebrew Scriptures have prophecies and eyewitness accounts, and the eyewitness accounts are both pro and con, friend and foe. Both enemies and friends of Israel were eyewitnesses and documented the events of the Hebrew Scriptures. That's why we know they're valid. And we know that the Hebrews had a system. They entered in vowel points so that they could change people's mentality about the Father's name, and they could change aspects of certain words as far as pronunciation. But other than that, they made sure the textual integrity was 100%. Instead of calling the Father Yahuwah or Yahweh or Yahweh or Iwi, whatever the true pronunciation is, I'm still trying to figure that one out. All I know is Hallelujah led me to Hallelujah. And Yahu, the Yud He Vav He, Yahuwah, because the first H is a Yah, first Chet is a Yah, is A sound, the second, I say. So instead of Yahweh, it's Yahweh or Yahuwah. Since it's Hallelujah, then I assume it's Hallelujah. Anyway, and notice that Yahusha was the name translated Joshua in the Old Testament, and it is the same name that is written in the Hebrew book of Revelations, Yahusha, not Yeshua. So anyway, I really wish I knew where I was because I have less than a minute. Rabbit tracks and all of that stuff. So when we are trying to express science, prophecy in history, we know that the Hebrew Scriptures from the first century were altered because if you read Joel 2:28 through 32, we see that in verse 32, we not only get the Father's name Yahuwah, but also that it is the name that we are to call upon for salvation. It is reiterated in Acts chapter 2 by Simon Peter, Shimon Kepha. But the phraseology has changed. We notice that whenever Paul or James or John or Peter, anyone quoted scripture, it was always altered. Therefore, we know that the phraseology of the New Testament has been altered, since no Holy Spirit was ever referred to, or even the whiff of the idea was never, ever even insinuated. But yet, all of a sudden, we see that Rome has a Trinity, and they drill it into people's heads as if it's a reality. But in John chapter 9, the healing of the blind man, or going through to John 14, we see that I only do what the Father tells me. It is the Father that does the works in me and through me. I only say what the Father tells me to say. I only do what the Father tells me to do. I only do as I'm instructed by the Father. Never once is there a Holy Spirit shown. And earlier, how you already heard on the recording, how the Father has the scroll. It is given to the angel who takes it and gives it to the Messiah on his throne, and there is no Holy Spirit. Not mentioned, not inferred, not even an insinuation. And every single sun god pagan sun god religion all have several forms of trinities. When the Father says, do not worship me as other pagans worship their deities, that means that there is no Trinity. There is the Father. He says, I am your Savior. I am alone. I do not share my glory with another. But of course, he's willing to share with his Son, but his Son is in essence 100% pure, the Father's essence. Again, the Father breathed the universe. It says he breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. But it says, but the Father ripped a part of his pure essence and put it in that baby earth suit. So Messiah is 100% the Father, but just a small dose in that little teeny body. 100% pure Father, but now a separate entity. Still hooked up, still the Father worked through the Messiah to be our example. So there are other things. In the research, I have some of the edicts that were brought by the proto-Catholics when they created Christianity. And they were the ones, it's in these writings where it says that you will honor Easter, not Passover. This is a rule. It says you will honor Easter as we and the other pagans have done since long ago. I'll have to find it, and this will be in a future video because I spend too much time winging it and I don't have my notes because I don't want people to think I'm making it up and I'm reading other people's research. I try to make it flow, but then again, my rabbit tracks mess me up. Like right now, I don't even know what I was saying. So as they made it illegal to have a Hebrew copy of the New Testament, to have a Hebrew copy of the Old Testament, made it illegal to honor the feasts and festivals, and stated that you had to honor Easter, Ishtar, Ashtaroth, a fake deity, Artemis, Nike. Okay? What we're dealing with is the fact that they said, no, we have demanded that you follow pagan tenets, pagan rites, pagan rituals on pain of death if you do not do what we say. And you will also notice that in the New Testament, it says that the followers of the Messiah, they believed all things the same. They served the same way. They shared with everybody that was honorable, and they had all things in common. There was joy, peace, and revival wherever they went. Now let's look at contrast after the Hebrew Torah was diminished completely, after the feasts and festivals were removed, and after pagan rites and rituals were inculcated and usurped the original scriptures. Well, we see that there were forced conversions, forced confessions, extortions, like the extortion booth where you would go to confess and then they would say, well, you sinned, you got to give us money. Now, when it comes to having all things in common and everybody having the same amount to share, we notice that they never built a building. They went to the nature settings like the Messiah did. They went to the synagogue. They went to the temple, and they went house to house. So all of the money that they gathered could be distributed and shared. That's why they had all things in common, and that's why they had revival. But now we see that Christians change the name of the Messiah, change the name of the Father, change the names of the apostles, change the names of the constellations, change the names of the days of the week, change the names of the days of the months. They changed certain aspects of the planets to all pagan names, pagan terminology. We see that forced conversions, forced confessions, that I already covered, no more revival, and building buildings and having extortion. And so, because there were no more revivals, because there is no more prophecy, because there is no more all things in common, because there is no more revival, all due to removing Torah. So, since everything in Christianity is nothing like what what the Father gave Moses on the mountain, and then Messiah came down and reiterated to solidify that foundation, to reorient us. And then we see that that reorientation did bring revival and a change in people's lives. The Father was able to work through them. And then now, what else do we have by the Christians? Besides just changing terminology, changing the tenets, and changing the things that we do? Oh, that's right. They move the world not closer and closer and closer to the light. No, further and further away from the light. And the Dark Ages followed. And then you get to the time of Charlemagne, where he got together and he spent time with some of the Eastern proto-Muslims and spent time cogitating and writing and sending letters back and forth from Constantinople, the city of Constantine, where he invented Christianity, or who invented Christianity. And it says that the Roman Christians got together with the Constantinian Christians, and they took this white boy, and they put an entourage around him of warriors, and they sent him to the Arabian Peninsula. And they called him Muhammad, and they trained him, and then they gave him a new list of tenets to follow. They said, you got to pretend to be a prophet, and you got to pretend to be the final one, and you got to make sure that you refer to the prophets because they're true prophets. Everybody knows that they're prophets. It's knowledge of history. But we have to circumvent them. Our form of circumventing didn't give us the ability to conquer the whole world, so we need to invent something that's violent, using hell as a deterrent to make people do what we say wasn't enough because the promise of heaven superseded it. So what we got to do is take heaven away from everybody but the people that do exactly what we say. So you have hell to scare everybody into compliance, and heaven is only for the people who are violent. And then, of course, you see that Charlemagne made a deal with the proto-Muslims. And you see that he allowed them to enter, and Europe, all of a sudden, they went from the medieval times to the Dark Ages. Why? Well, Muslims put urine and feces into the foods of the unbelievers to desecrate their lives even further. They admit it in some of their writings, but they don't admit it now. Just like they rape and they murder and they beat their wives and they're pedophiles. But we're not allowed to say that. We're not allowed to point out the crimes of Islam because they have bribed the people in charge of the governments and the people in charge of the medias to only force people to only say nice things about Islam. Now remember, in Revelation, it talks about 200 million people escaping when the time comes, escaping between the Tigris and the Euphrates River, and they spread in all directions, north, south, east, and west, and that's Islam. And it says, wherever they go, there's destruction in their wake. And as we see, ever since the Wahhabist infiltration, the Masons created, as I discussed, they created evolution, and they created communism, and instigated and implemented that, and socialism in the West, because the Protestant world didn't want to follow the papal edicts. They were under the impression that they had escaped, even though they followed the same pagan tenets. The Masons always made certain to take them further and further away from Torah, further and further away from the scriptures, and more into the Christian tenets and doctrines, which is why, again, we see the world becoming more and more violent, more and more confused, more and more angry and hateful. Okay, so now when Muhammad comes in and he says that the earth is flat, well, modern science, 2,300 years ago, Aristophanes proved that the earth isn't flat. One day there was a well, and a specific time of that day, he noticed, he had read that the sunlight went directly down, and you could look down and see the sun because it was directly above, at noon, directly above that well. Well, he looked in his own area, and they had talked about sticks being in the ground and that it had no shadow. You see, that was the two confirmations that he had in his mind. And he thought, well, on that very same day, and he went and he looked out, and he saw that the sticks and trees had shadows, and the wells did not have the sun directly in the middle of it. So he had somebody measure And of course, and keep in touch with him on that day at the same time of day, because of course, all they had was sundials, but they had the sun to go by. But the thing is, it fluctuates, longer day, shorter day. But a sundial was calculated to keep a specific amount of time semi-accurate, and so they had the ability. He took measurements of the shadows of the sticks. Noticed that the well did not have it, but it was off to a certain degree. He took those and made note of those calculations. Had the person confirm at that well, yes, it is directly below. Yes, the stick has no shadow. And he knew the exact distance, the precise distance of those 2 points. And so he took the angle of the shadow, the distance, and then by that degree difference, did the math to show that the Earth was a spheroid 2,300 years ago. So before modern science went up with rockets and took pictures of it and then set satellites out, I used to love watching the satellites, and I would leave my TV on, and I would go to sleep watching the Earth as the satellite in a geosynchronous orbit, or the ones that allowed the Earth to turn underneath it, but the Earth turned so slowly, of course, that you'd have to look at it at different times of the day to see, But showing that the Earth is not flat. Modern science shows that the Earth is not flat. Okay, well, we know for a fact the NASA stereo satellite observing the sun said that after their calculations over several years, they declared that the sun belches off an average of 4 million metric tons every second. As a result of that, they say that the sun loses 5 feet a day in circumference loss. I did some calculations. 5 foot a day times 365.4 comes to 1,827 feet every year. I then did some breakdown math, how much of 1,827 feet, how much of that is a mile? 0.3467273 something, all the way down 14 decimals or something. Well, 0.346 is 0.13 above, in other words, 0.33, whereas 0.33 0.346, so that's 46 is more than 33 by 13, therefore more than a third of a mile every year based on those calculations. The further you go back in time, the more surface area there is by natural processes. I am under the impression that, of course, there's going to be more exhausted off. But just at that one basic captured data point, 1/3 of a mile. Every year you go backwards. That means every 3 years you go backwards, there is more than a mile of regained surface circumference. So, Earth, 24,000 some odd miles around, I think. Sun, 2.7 million miles around in 2014 in circumference. So, you go 3 million miles, just 3 million years in the past. That is going to be more than 1 million miles of regained circumference. If it's 2.7 million now, that means it will be 3.7 million miles in circumference. That is 0.64, 64% larger than it is now. Almost two-thirds larger in just 3 million years of the past. We would be like becoming like Venus. It would be so hot that having liquid water on Earth would be impossible. 3 million years. Evolution could not happen. DNA is proof that evolution is not possible. Why? It has schematics, blueprints, follows processes and procedures, and all in a precise timeline. If something develops ahead, talk about the stomach for a second. First of all, we know that the stomach has the organ, but the organ itself has a lining, and that lining is covered in a mucus. So that when the body builds the little chemical factories that create and excrete into the stomach the acids that help us to digest our food, what if the mucus lining had not been placed there? The stomach would be eaten by its own juices. Understand that the chemical plants that create the acids also have to be able to contain them and to distribute them. They have to have sensors to know when to put it in, when to stop because it's adequately filled, when to check the percentages to know when an adjustment is necessary. What if it didn't create the proper mucus? Well, then what if that mucus hindered the acids from literally getting into the stomach and excreted it out into the body? The body would eat itself up. You see how this is precise timing and within a time frame so that it's compatible with the rest of the organs and the rest of their functionalities. DNA has way too much information. Come here, baby. Good girl. Way too much information to happen by random chance and happenstance. It couldn't happen by accident, but they say that it did. Well, again, DNA cannot last outside the body for very long. They found a T-Rex dinosaur, and it was mostly fossilized, but they found that part of one of the legs was not fossilized. They found blood platelets. They found they found soft tissue and some tendons. Well, if they can extract DNA out of that, that's something in itself. But the fact that it was mostly fossilized, but not entirely, here you go, baby, shows also, since evolutionists haven't come to us and said, wow, look at all of this, because it was an evolutionary scientist that literally shared this find, but they just said, well, we need to rethink how long DNA can last. They didn't say, well, this is proof that we didn't evolve. But, okay, we are at 2 hours, 48 minutes. That's an awful lot of time for you precious folks to sit through. Again, I promised to wrap it up before 2 hours, and I obviously didn't make it. So anyway, back to Muhammad and supposedly being a prophet, and him forcing his will on other people. Since Muslims do not believe in modern science, they are only allowed to believe what Muhammad said. Since Muslims have to believe everything that Muhammad said or they're not a good Muslim, and since they are commanded to follow Muhammad's example, I did several videos on just quoting the Quran. And the basic tenets are if you're a Muslim, you're never allowed to make friends with non-Muslims. It says that several times. Do not make friends with the non-Muslims. It says any Muslim that makes friends with non-Muslims is to be considered one of the non-Muslims. It says when Muhammad was asked, who will be in paradise? He said, what he said was prophets and martyrs. But there are no prophets, and the only martyrs in Islam are the nonviolent Muslims that are put to death because they refuse to go murder innocent people. So, when he said martyrs, and he said jihadis, he meant jihadis, because they're supposed to fight with all of their goods, with all of their money, and with their lives. And it says, this is something that none of you shall escape. And he was talking about going to hell. But he says, the hope is that some of you shall be rescued out. And we will leave the evildoers crouching in the flames. So Muhammad, actually almost the entire Quran, there may be one thing attributed to Muhammad. If it doesn't use his name, and if it says the apostle or whatever, or the prophet of Allah or the apostle of Allah, then it wasn't actually Muhammad. It was the people that were writing the Quran pretending that it was Muhammad. Because if it was Muhammad, it would say, Muhammad said this. So anyway, it said, well, what would happen? One of the guys, I don't know if he was either a slave or a warrior, and he says, oh, Allah's prophet, what would happen if I were to die in battle here? He would say, oh, you would wake up in paradise. So again, contradicting himself. Because again, the thread is everybody goes to hell, so you better do what you're told if you want to get out. But now he's saying, well, if you die in jihad while murdering other people in the name and cause of Allah, you're going to go directly there. Again, showing that there are contradictions in the Quran, literal, absolute contradictions. But on the other hand, it shows how it's psychologically manipulating people. Since they don't have any prophecy, they cannot say, look at these prophecies. Look at how amazing this is. Look at all of these scientific data points in the Quran. No, they have all kinds of things, and they say, oh, it was the Quran that led man into science and out of the Dark Ages. No, it was actually Quran that put people into the Dark Ages. They always take credit. 5 or 6 different times I was reading Quran and Hadith where Muhammad takes credit, saying that it was Allah that gave Torah to Moses on the mountain, and that Torah was a light to mankind. It says, the people of the book surely received their information from Allah up above, but that we are now, and Muhammad is the final prophet. Okay, so we see that he has no prophecy. We see that all of the tenets are the exact opposite of Torah, because if you have to go into someone else's nation, then go into someone else's community, and then go into a neighborhood, and then break into someone's house to steal their valuables and kidnap and enslave them, every single one of those things, first you have to get close to your prey. Then you got to trick them into trusting you so that you can gain access to their home and stuff and to the authorities in the region so that then you can con them into giving you authority. It says never favor a non-Muslim over a Muslim several times. Those that do shall be considered one of them. So take an understanding. Everywhere Islam goes, first of all, they're going there to conquer. Second of all, they're going to establish Sharia law and put Allah above everyone else's philosophy, faith, and or foundation. When they come to the West, they already know that they're coming here to use jihad to destroy the West, because the Masons brought them here. Look up Albert Pike, The 3 Wars and How We Will Use Islam to Destroy the West. That's why they had the Wahhabist infiltration to establish Sharia law in Asia, and then they unleashed 200 million Muslims all the way to Indonesia, all the way to China, all the way up to Russia, all the way into Europe, all the way down into Africa. The slave trade was because of the Moors conquering Eastern Asia, Southern Europe, and Northern Africa. Then when they enslaved, what they did was they'd slip into Africa, they would say, accept Allah or be enslaved. And so then those that accepted Allah became Muslims, and then they helped the other Muslims conquer Northern Africa. But those that would not comply got sold into slavery, kidnapped, and then sold into slavery. They got bought by Jesuits, Templars, Masons, Proto-Masons, and whatever, if they hadn't been invented yet. And of course, other Muslims. And then we see that they came and they got bought by the Masons, the Mormons, the Muslims, the Shriners over here in America. And so then now who's in charge of America? Still the Jesuits, the Masons, the Mormons, the Shriners. And now the Muslims are being forced into our nation, even though Thomas Jefferson made it illegal for them to be on our soil. Thomas Jefferson got him a Quran, and he studied the Quran, and he realized and stated, Islam is incompatible with any free society. We are creating a free society based on mutual consent. Even though he was a Mason, Evidently, he wasn't as evil as his predecessors and successors because he wanted to protect the American people, whereas the Masons nowadays want to destroy America. And again, they're taking massive bribes. How do Muslims have money to bribe the world and allow them to infiltrate and destroy the rest of the West? Very simple. When the Masons in charge of America, together with the Jesuits, who are in charge of everything, our oil finds here in America, in Texas, Oklahoma, the Gulf of Mexico, Alaska, up in the Dakotas, all over America there is oil. Our government made us buy oil from the Arab Muslims, giving them hundreds of trillions of dollars and taking it out of our economy. We would have been paying a nickel for a gallon of gas. To this very day, it wouldn't have gotten over a nickel. You know how many trillionaires would have been here in America? How many billionaires? How many millionaires? If we would have allowed our own money to stay here to where we could have invested in our own endeavors, our own families, our own friends, our own nation. But no, they took money from us and gave it to our enemies. And now those enemies are then using those monies and bribing leadership of the West, and then allowing them to be forced immigration, and then paying off so that the crimes of Islam, it's illegal to tell the crimes of Islam in the West, and it's illegal to promote the truth of the Hebrew Scriptures. Why? Because it says in the end, the Messiah was discussing in the end how it'll be just like the destruction of Jerusalem, but the whole world is going to go over a very similar occupation and destruction. If we will not comply, then the Jesuits, invented Islam so that they would have a fist against the Protestants. Now, the Masons infiltrated the Protestants so that they could make certain that the Protestants were consistently being driven away from the light and further away from the truth and back into the tenets that the Jesuits wanted them to follow. Because if you go back to Torah, you'll be able to tell. You got to know you have to know the standard before you can recognize the counterfeit. The thing that I learned about the reason that they keep changing our money is because they were finding ways to duplicate a reasonable facsimile of money so that people could then use counterfeit money and live rich, further messing up the economy for the people who work hard. And spiritually, it's the same thing. We have to know Torah. When Uncle Moshe came down from the mountain, he said, it is important to have a regimen. When you're up during the day, be discussing Torah. When you're in your endeavors of the day, be thinking of Torah. When you're putting your children at bed, be reading and teaching them Torah. It says, have it as if it's bound to your head and your forehead. Have it as if it's bound to your arms so that everything you think of is guided by the formula of Torah. Everything you do with your hands or your feet, understand it should follow the tenets of Torah. We have the commandment of tzitzit. We have fringes that we wear. Remember, the woman sick for 12 years says she touched the fringes of his garment. And all right. Well, sorry, I got cut off there. Basically, the woman with the issue of blood for 12 years, when she touched the fringes of Messiah's garment, she was instantly healed. Now, the Jews have a practice of oral law where they put a box on their forehead and a box around their arm, and they wrap leather straps around it, and they put scriptures inside of the little boxes. Personally, I'm not sure if I should say that offends me, but what I mean is that the Father was literally saying, whatever you do with your hands, whatever you do with your mind must be guided by Torah. It means that we should have it so well ingrained in our mind that everything that we do follows those lines. Because you see, you can't get Torah through osmosis. Just because there's scriptures inside of a little box strapped to your forehead, that isn't getting you any closer to doing the Father's will. But yet, they wrap themselves up, and it costs money It costs money for those little phylacteries. It doesn't make them one iota closer to the Messiah, not 1 inch closer to doing what the Father says. So yeah, I'm passionate about it because they turn it into a luxury of fashion that costs money, when in fact it's so simple. Do what the Father says. He'll bless you. He'll meet your needs. If he doesn't meet your needs, he'll meet your needs anyway. Somehow he'll get you through it. He'll get you through what you are to go through, because we are witnesses. We share the good news. Our duty is to follow the Messiah's example. He honored Torah. He honored Torah in sincere humility. He showed us it could be done, but you have to be filled with the Father, filled with his word, filled with his essence and his spiritual energy, filled with the motivation that can only come from him, not from a passion for wanting to do what's right, but for his spirit indwelling in us and then working through us. You see, we are here to learn eternal lessons in this finite timeline. And so I do have to cut this short because I've already gone over 3 hours, and it's really unfair for you, precious folk. So again, you got to know the standard before you can recognize the counterfeit. You know who loves you: the Father above, the Messiah, and all of us.